All right, I'm gonna wait for a few more people before I get into reading all this. But tell me what y'all think about this one. I really like this one. Just that's one I've been working on. All right, we got a few people in here. I'm gonna read this Gene Wolfe short story. I've been meaning to do a space on this one for a while, and I've just been putting it off. So I figured today is a good day to do it. I think it's one of the best things he wrote. It's going to take a little bit because it's a bit of a longer short story, but I figured I'd read it into the record in the way that I read the Anarchist Banker in. I think that it's just as applicable to thinking about things today. It's very prophetic. I think about it literally all the time, so I might as well read it. It's called Seven American Nights, and it's a pretty controversial short story. A lot of people don't. There's been a lot of discussion in the almost 50 years it's been out. I think he put it out in 1978, and it still remains an object of discourse and discussion. People are still putting out essays on their interpretation of it because it's in an epistemologically undecided state what the actual story is here, as you'll see as we go on. So this is how it begins. Esteemed and learned madam, as I wrote you, it appears to me likely that your son Nadan, may Allah preserve him, has left the old capital and traveled, of his own will or another's, north into the region of the Bay of Delaware. My conjecture is now confirmed by the discovery in those regions of the notebooks I enclose. It is not of American manufacture, as you see, and though it holds only the records of a single week, several suggestive items therein provide us new reason to hope. I have photocopied the contents to guide me in my investigations, but I am alert to the probability that you, madam, with your superior knowledge of the young man we seek, may discover implications I have overlooked. Should that be the case, I urge you to write me at once. Though I hesitate to mention it in connection with so encouraging a finding, your most recently due remission has not yet arrived. I assumed that this tardiness results from the procrastination of the males, which is here truly abominable. I must warn you, however, that I shall be forced to discontinue the search unless funds sufficient for my expenses are forthcoming before the advent of winter. With inexpressible respect, Hassan Kerbali. So that's the intro, and then here we get the notebook, is the rest of the story, the notebooks that he's enclosing. Here I am at last. After 12 mortal days aboard the Princess Fatima, 12 days of cold and ennui, 12 days of bad food and throbbing engines, the joy of being on land again is like the delight a condemned man must feel when a letter from the Shah snatches him from beneath the very blade of death. America, America, dull days are no more. They say that everyone who comes here either loves or hates you, America. By Allah, I love you now. Having begun this record at last, I find I do not know where to begin. I had been reading travel diaries before I left home, and so when I saw you, O book, lying so square and thick in your stall in the bazaar, why should I not have adventures too, and write a book like Osman Aga's? Few come to this sad country at the world's edge after all, and most who do land farther up the coast. And that gives me the clue I was looking for, how to begin. America began for me as colored water. When I went out on deck yesterday morning, the ocean had changed from green to yellow. I had never heard of such a thing before, neither in my reading nor in my talks with Uncle Mirza, who was here 30 years ago. I am afraid I behaved like the greatest fool imaginable, running about the ship babbling and looking over the side every few minutes to make certain the rich mustard color was still there, It would not vanish the way things do in dreams when we try to point them out to someone else. The steward told me he knew. Golam Gassem, the grain merchant, whom I had tried to avoid meeting for the entire trip until that moment, said yes, yes, and turned away in a fashion that showed he had been avoiding me too, and that it was going to take more of a miracle than yellow water to change his feelings. One of the few Native Americans in first class came out just then, Mr., as the style is here, Tallman, husband of the lovely Madam Tallman, who really deserves such a tall man as myself, whether her husband chose that name in self derision or in the hope that it would erase others' memory of his infirmity, or whether it was his father's and is merely one of the countless ironies of fate, I do not know. There was something wrong with his back. As if I had not made enough a spectacle of myself already, I took this Mr. Tallman by the sleeve and told him to look over the side, explaining that the sea had turned yellow. I'm afraid Mr. Tallman turned white himself instead and turned something else too, his back, looking as though he would have struck me if he dared. It was comic enough, I suppose. I heard some of the other passengers chuckling about it afterward, but I don't believe I have seen such hatred in a human face before. Just then the captain came strolling up, and I, considerably deflated but not flattened yet, and thinking that he had not overheard Mr. Tallman and me, mentioned for the final time that day that the water had turned yellow. I know, the captain said. It's his country. Here he jerked his head in the direction of the pitiful Mr. Tallman, bleeding to death. Here it is evening again, and I see that I stopped writing last night before I had so much as described my first sight of the coast. Well, so be it. At home, it is midnight, or nearly, and the life of the cafes is at its height. How I wish that I were there now with you, Yasmin, not webbed among these red and purple-clad strangers who mob their own streets like an invading army and duck into their houses like rats into their holes. But you, Yasmin, or mother, or whoever may read this, will want to know of my day. Only you are sometimes to think of me as I am now, bent over an old, scarred table in a decayed room with two beds, listening to the hastening feet in the streets outside. I slept late this morning. I suppose I was more tired from the voyage than I realized. By the time I woke, the whole of the city was alive around me, with vendors crying fish and fruits under my shuttered window, and the great wooden wains the Americans call trucks rumbling over the broken concrete on their wide iron wheels, bringing up goods from the ships in the Potomac anchorage. One sees very odd teams here, Yasmin. When I went to get my breakfast, one must go outside to reach the lobby and dining room in these American hotels, which I would think would be very inconvenient in bad weather. I saw one of these trucks with two oxen, a horse and a mule in the traces, which would have made you laugh. The drivers crack their whips all the time. The first impression one gets of America is that it is not as poor as one has been told. It is only lately that it becomes apparent how much has been handed down from the previous century. The streets here are paved, but they are old and broken. There are fine, though decayed, buildings everywhere. This hotel is one, the Inn of Holidays, it is called. More modern in appearance than the ones we see at home, where for so long traditional architecture was enforced by law. We were on Main Street, and when I had finished my breakfast, it was very good and very cheap by our standards, though I'm told it is impossible to get anything out of season here. I asked the manager where I should go see the sights of the city. He is a short and phenomenally ugly man, something of a hunchback, as so many of them are. There are no tours, he said. Not anymore. I told him that I simply wanted to wander about by myself and perhaps sketch a bit. You can do that. North for the buildings, south for the theater, west for the park. Do you plan to go to the park, Mr. Jaffasarda? I haven't decided yet. You should hire at least two securities if you go to the park. I can recommend an agency. I have my pistol. You'll need more than that, sir. Naturally, I decided then and there that I would go to the park and alone, but I have determined not to spend the sole small coin of adventure this land has provided me so far, before I discover what else it may offer to enrich my existence. Accordingly, I set off for the north when I left the hotel. I have not, thus far, seen this city or any American city by night. What they might be like if these people thronged the streets then as we do, I cannot imagine. Even by clearest day, there is the impression of carnival, of some mad circus whose performance began 100 or more years ago and has not ended yet. At first, it seemed that only every fourth or fifth person suffered some trace of the genetic damage that destroyed the old America. But as I grew more accustomed to the streets and thus less quick to dismiss as Americans and no more the unhappy old woman who wanted me to buy flowers and the boy who dashed shrieking between the wheels of a truck and began instead to look at them as human beings, in other words, just as I would look at some chance met person on one of our own streets, I saw that there was hardly a soul not marked in some way. These deformities, though they are individually hideous, in combination with the bright, ragged clothing so common here, give the meanest assemblage the character of a pageant. I sauntered along, hardly out of earshot of one group of street musicians before encountering another, and in a few strides passed a man so tall that he was taller seated on a low step than I standing, a bearded dwarf with a withered arm, and a woman whose face had been divided by some devil into halves, one large-eyed and idiotically despairing, the other squinting and sneering. There can be no question about it. Yasmin must not read this. I have been sitting here for an hour at least, staring at the flame of the candle, sitting and listening to something that from time to time beats against the steel shutters that close the window of this room. The truth is that I am paralyzed by a fear that entered me. I do not know from whence, yesterday, and has been growing ever since. Everyone knows that these Americans were once the most skilled creators of consciousness altering substances the world had ever seen. The same knowledge that permitted them to forge the chemicals that destroyed them, so that they might have bread that never staled, innumerable poisons for vermin, and a host of unnatural materials for every purpose, also contrived synthetic alkaloids that produced endless, feverish imaginings. Surely some, at least, of these skills remain. Or if they do not, then some of the substances themselves, preserved for 80 or 100 years in hidden cabinets, and no doubt growing more dangerous as the world forgets them. I think that someone on the ship may have administered some such drug to me. That is out at last. I felt so much better at having written it. It took a great deal of effort, that I took several turns about this room. Now that I have written it down, I do not believe it at all. Still, last night I dreamed of that bread of which I first read in the little schoolroom of Uncle Mirza's country house. There's no complex, towering literary dream such as I have had sometimes, and embroidered and boasted of afterward over coffee. Just the vision of a loaf of soft white bread lying on a plate in the center of a small table, bread that retained the fragrance of the oven, surely one of the most delicious in the world, though it was smeared with gray mold. Why would the Americans wish such a thing? Yet all the historians agree that they did, just as they wish their own corpses to appear living forever. It is only this country, with its colorful, fetid streets, deformed people, and harsh, alien language, that makes me feel as drugged and dreaming as I do. Praise Allah that I can speak Farsi to you, O book. Will you believe that I've taken out every article of clothing I have just to read the maker's labels? Will I believe it, for that matter, when I read this at home? The public buildings to the north, once the great center, as I understand it, of political activity, offer a severe contrast to the streets of the still occupied areas. In the latter, the old buildings are in the last stages of decay or have been repaired by makeshift and inappropriate means, but they seethe with the life of those who depend upon such commercial activity as the port provides, and with those who depend on them, and so on. The monumental buildings, because they were constructed of the most imperishable materials, appear almost whole, though there are a few fallen columns and sagging porticos, and in several places small trees, mostly the sad Carpinus caroliniana, I believe, have rooted in the crevices of walls. Still, if it is true, as has been written, that time's beard is gray, not with the passage of years, but with the dust of ruined cities, it is here that he trails it. These imposing shells are no more than that. They were built, it would seem, to be cooled and ventilated by machinery. Many are windowless, their interiors now no more than sunless caves reeking of decay. Into these I did not venture. Others had had fixed windows that once were walls of glass, and a few of these remained, so that I was able to sketch their construction. Most, however, are destroyed. Time's beard has swept away their very shards. Though these old buildings, with one or two exceptions, are deserted, I encountered several beggars. They seem to be Americans whose deformities preclude their doing useful work, and one cannot help but feel sorry for them, though their appearance is often as distasteful as their importunities. They offered to show me the former residence of their Padshah, and as an excuse to give them a few coins, I accompanied them, making them first pledge to leave me when I had seen it. The structure they pointed out to me was situated at the end of a long avenue lined with impressive buildings, so I suppose they might have been correct in thinking it was once important. Hardly more than the foundation, some rubble, and one ruined wing remains now, and it cannot have been originally of an enduring construction. No doubt it was actually a summer palace or something of that kind. The beggars have now forgotten its very name and call it merely the White House. When they had guided me to this relic, I pretended that I wanted to make drawings, and they left as they had promised. In 5 or 10 minutes, however, one particularly enterprising fellow returned. He had no lower jaw, so that I had quite a bit of difficulty in understanding him at first, but after we had shouted back and forth a good deal, I telling him to depart and threatening to kill him on the spot, and he protesting, I realized that he was forced to make the sound of D for B, N for M, and T for P, and after that we got along better. I will not attempt to render his speech phonetically, but he said that since I had been so generous, he wished to show me a great secret, something foreigners like myself did not even realize existed. Clean water? I suggested. No, no, a great, great secret, Captain. You think all this is dead. He waved a misshapen hand at the desolate structures that surrounded us. Indeed, I do. One still lives. You would like to see it? I will guide. Don't worry about the others. They're afraid of me. I will drive them away. If you are leading me into some kind of ambush, I warn you, you will be the first to suffer. He looked at me very seriously for a moment, and a man seemed to stare from the eyes in that ruined face, so that I felt a twinge of real sympathy. See there, the big building to the south on Pennsylvania? Captain, my father's father's father was chief of a department, he said. There, I would not betray you. From what I have read of this country's policies in the days of his father's father's father, that was little enough reassurance. But I followed him. We went diagonally across several blocks, passing through two ruined buildings. There were human bones in both, and remembering his boast, I asked him if they had belonged to the workers there. No, no. He tapped his chest again, a habitual gesture, I suppose, and scooping up a skull from the floor, held it beside his own head so that I could see that it exhibited cranial deformities much like his own. We sleep here, to be shut behind strong walls from the things that come at night. We die here, mostly in winter time. No one buries us. You should bury each other, I said. He tossed down the skull, which shattered on the terrazzo floor, walking 1,000 dismal echoes. No shovel, and few are strong, but come with me. At first sight, the building to which he led me looked more decayed than many of the ruins. One of its spires had fallen, the bricks lay in the street, yet, when I looked again, I saw that there must be something in what he said. The broken windows had been closed with ironwork, at least as well made as the shutters that protect my room here, and the door, though old and weathered, was tightly shut and looked strong. This is the museum, my guide told me, the only part left, almost, of the silent city that still lives in the old way. Would you like to see inside? I told him that I doubted that we would be able to enter. Wonderful machines. He pulled at my sleeve. You see in, Captain. Come. We followed the building's walls around several corners and at last entered a sort of alcove at the rear. Here there's a grill set in the weed-grown ground, and the beggar gestured toward it proudly. I made him stand some distance off, then knelt, as he had indicated, to look through the grill. There was a window of unshattered glass beyond the grill. It was very soiled now, but I could see through into the basement of the building, and there, just as the beggar had said, stood an orderly array of complex mechanisms. I stared for some time, trying to gain some notion of their purpose, and at length an old American appeared among them, peering at one and then another, and whisking the shining bars and gears with a rag. The beggar had crept closer as I watched. He pointed at the old man and said, Still come from north and south to study here. Some day we are great again. Then I thought of my own lovely country, whose eclipse, though without genetic damage, lasted 2,300 years. And I gave him money and told him that yes, I was certain America would be great again some day, and left him and returned here. I have opened the shutters so that I can look across the city to the obelisk and catch the light of the dying sun. Its fields and valleys of fire do not seem more alien to me or more threatening than this strange, despondent land. Yet I know that we are all one, the beggar, the old man moving among the machines of a dead age, those machines themselves, the sun, and I. A century ago, when this was a thriving city, the philosophers used to speculate on the reason that each neutron and proton and electron exhibited the same mass as all the others of its kind. Now we know that there is only one particle of each variety moving backwards and forward in time, an electron when it travels as we do, a positron when its temporal displacement is retrograde, the same few particles appearing billions of times to make up a single object, and the same few particles forming all the objects, so that we're all the sketches, as it were, of the same set of pastels. I have gone out to eat. There's a good restaurant not far from the hotel, better even than the dining room here. When I came back, the manager told me that there's to be a play tonight at the theater and assured me that because it is so close to his hotel, in truth, he is very proud of this theater, and no doubt its proximity to his hotel is the only circumstance that permits the hotel to remain open. I will be in no danger if I go without an escort. To tell the truth, I am a little ashamed that I did not hire a boat today to take me across the channel to the park, so now I will attend the play and dare the night streets. Here I am again, returned to this too large, too bare, uncarpeted room, which is already beginning to seem a second house, with no adventures to retail from the dangerous, benighted streets. The truth is that the theater is hardly more than 100 paces to the south. I kept my hand on the butt of my pistol and walked along with a great many other people, mostly Americans, who were also going to the theater and felt something of a fool. The building is as old as those in the Silent City, I should think, but it has been kept in some repair. There is more of a feeling of gaiety, though to me it was largely an alien gaiety, among the audience than we have at home, and less of the atmosphere of what I may call the sacredness of art. By that I knew that the drama really is sacred here, as the colorful clothes of the populace make clear in any case. An exaggerated and solemn respect always indicates a loss of faith. Having recently come for my dinner, I ignored the stands in the lobby at which the Americans, who seem to eat constantly when they can afford it, were selecting various cold meats and pastries, and took my place in the theater proper. I was hardly in my seat before a pipe-puffing old gentleman, an American, desired me to move in order that he might reach his own. I stood up gladly, of course, and greeted him as grandfather, as our own politeness, if not theirs, demands. But while he was settling himself, and I was still standing beside him, I caught a glimpse of his face from the exact angle at which I had seen it this afternoon and recognized him as the old man I had watched through the grill. Here was a difficult situation. I wanted very much to draw him into the conversation, but I could not well confess that I had been spying on him. I puzzled over the question until the lights were extinguished and the play began. It was Vidal's Visit to a Small Planet, one of the classics of the old American theater, a play I have often read, but never, until now, seen performed. I would have liked it much better if it had been done with the costumes and settings of its proper period. Unhappily, the director had chosen to modernize the entire affair, just as we sometimes present Rustam Beg as if Rustam had been a hero of the war just past. General Powers was a contemporary American soldier with the mannerisms of a cowardly bandit, Spelding, a publisher of libelous broadsheets, and so on. The only characters that gave me much pleasure were the limping spaceman Creton and the ingenue Ellen Spaulding, played as and by a radiantly beautiful American blonde. All through the first act, my mind had been returning, particularly during Spelding's speeches, to the problem of the old man beside me. By the time the curtain fell, I had decided that the best way to start a conversation might be to offer to fetch him a kebab or whatever he might want from the lobby, since his threadbare appearance suggested that he might be ready enough to be treated, and the weakness of his legs would provide an admirable excuse. I tried the gambit as soon as the flambeaux were relit, and it worked as well as I could have wished. When I returned with a paper tray of sandwiches and bitter drinks, he remarked to me quite spontaneously that he had noticed me flexing my right hand during the performance. Yes, I said, I had been writing a good deal before I came here. That set him off, and he began to discourse, frequently with a great deal more detail than I could comprehend, on the topic of writing machines. At last, I halted the flow with some question that must have revealed that I knew less of the subject than he had supposed. Have you ever, he asked me, carved a letter in a potato and moistened it with a stamp pad and used it to imprint paper? As a child, yes, we used a turnip, but no doubt that principle is the same. Exactly. And the principle is that of extended abstraction. I ask you, on the lowest level, what is communication? Talking, I suppose? His shrill laugh rose above the hubbub of the audience. Not at all. Smell. Here he gripped my arm. Smell is the essence of communication. Look at that word essence itself. When you smell another human being, you take chemicals from his body into your own, analyze them, and from the analysis, you accurately deduce his emotional state. You do it so constantly and so automatically that you are largely unconscious of it and say simply, he seemed frightened or he was angry, you see? I nodded, interested in spite of myself. When you speak, you are telling another how you would smell if you smelled as you should, and if he could smell you properly from where he stands. It is almost certain that speech was not developed until the glaciations that terminated the Pliocene stimulated mankind to develop fire, and the frequent inhalation of wood smoke had dulled the olfactory organs. I see. No, you hear, unless you are by chance reading my lips, which in this din would be a useful accomplishment. He took an enormous bite of his sandwich, spilling pink meat that had surely come from no natural animal. When you write, you are telling the other how you would speak if he could hear you. When you print with your turnip, you are telling him how you would write. You will notice that we have already reached the third level of abstraction. I nodded again. It used to be believed that only a limited number K of levels of abstraction were possible before the original matter disappeared altogether. Some very interesting mathematical work was done about 70 years ago in an attempt to derive a generalized expression for K for various systems. Now we know that the number can be infinite if the array represents an open curve, and that closed curves are also possible. I don't understand. Hold up, I need a sip. I don't understand. You are young and handsome, very fine looking with your wide shoulders and black mustache. Let us suppose a young woman loves you. If you and I and she were crouched now on the limb of a tree, you would scent her desire. Today, perhaps she tells you of that desire, but it is also possible, is it not, that she may write you of her desire. Remembering Yasmin's letters, I assented. But suppose those letters are perfumed, a musky, sweet perfume, you understand, a closed curve. The perfume is not the odor of her body, but an artificial simulation of it. It may not be what she feels, but it is what she tells you she feels. Your real love is for a whale, a male deer, and a bed of roses. He was about to say more, but the curtain went up for the second act. I found that act both more enjoyable and more painful than the first. The opening scene in which Creton, soon joined by Ellen, reads the mind of the family cat was exceptionally effective. The concealed orchestra furnished music to indicate cat thoughts. I wish I knew the identity of the composer, but my playbill does not provide the information. The bedroom wall became a shadow screen where we saw silhouettes of cats catching birds, and then, when Ellen tickled the real cat's belly, making love. As I have said, Creton and Ellen were the play's best characters. The juxtaposition of Ellen's willowy beauty and high-spirited naivety and Creon's clear desire for her illuminated perfectly the Paphian difficulties that would confront a powerful telepath were such persons to exist. On the other hand, Creton's summoning of the presidents, which closes the act, was as objectionable as it could possibly have been made. The foreign ruler conjured up by error was played as a Turk and as broadly as possible. I confess to feeling some prejudice against the bloodthirsty race myself, but what was done was indefensible. When the president of the World Council appeared, he was portrayed as an American. By the end of that scene, I was in no very good mood. I think that I have not yet shaken off the fatigues of the crossing, and they, combined with a fairly strenuous day spent prowling around the ruins of the silent city, had left me now in the state in which the smallest irritation takes on the dimensions of a mortal insult. The old curator beside me discerned my irascibility, but mistook the reason for it and began to apologize for the state of the American stage, saying that all the performers of talent emigrated as soon as they gained recognition and returned only when they had failed on the eastern shore of the Atlantic. No, no, I said. Creton and the girl are very fine, and the rest of the cast is at least adequate. He seemed not to have heard me. They pick them up wherever they can. They choose them for their faces. When they have appeared in 3 plays, they call themselves actors. At the Smithsonian, I'm employed there, perhaps I've already mentioned it. We have tapes of real theater, Laurence Olivier, Orson Welles, Catherine Cornell. Spaulding is a barber, at least he was. He used to put his chair under the old Kennedy statue and shave the passers-by. Ellen is a trollop, and Power is a drayman. That lame fellow Creton used to snare sailors for his singing house on Portland Street. His disparagement of his own national culture embarrassed me, though it put me in a better mood. I have noticed that the two often go together. Perhaps I am secretly humiliated to find that people of no great importance can affect my interior state with a few words or some mean service. I took my leave of him and went to the confectioner's stand in the lobby. The Americans have a very pretty custom of duplicating the speckled eggs of wild birds and marzipan, and I bought a box of these, not only because I wanted to try them myself, but because I felt certain they would prove a treat for the old man, who must seldom have enough money to afford luxuries of that kind. I was quite correct. He ate them eagerly, but when I sampled one, I found its odor, as though I were eating artificial violets, so unpleasant that I did not take another. We were speaking of writing, the old man said, the closed curve and the open curve. I did not have time to make the point that both could be achieved mechanically, but the monograph I am now developing turns upon that very question, and it happens that I have examples with me. First, the closed curve. In the days when our president was among the world's 10 most powerful men, the reality of the Paul Laurent you see on the stage there, each president received hundreds of requests every day for his signature. To have granted them would have taken hours of his time. To have refused them would have raised a brigade of enemies. What did they do? They called upon the resources of science. That science devised the machine that wrote this. From within his clean, worn coat, he drew a folded sheet of white paper. I opened it and saw that it was covered with the text of what appeared to be a public address written in a childish scrawl. Mentally attempting to review the list of the American presidents I had seen in some digest of world history long ago, I asked him whose hand it was. The machine's. Whose hand is being imitated here is one of the things I'm attempting to discover. In the dim light of the theater, it was almost impossible to make out the spaded script, but I caught the word Sardinia. Surely, by correlating the contents to historical events, it would be possible to date it quite accurately. The old man shook his head. The text itself was composed by another machine to achieve some national psychological effect. It is not probable that it bears any real relationship to the issues of its day, but now look here. He drew out a second sheet and unfolded it for me. So far as I could see, it was completely blank. I was still staring at it when the curtains went up. As Creon moved his toy aircraft across the stage, the old man took a final egg and turned away to watch the play. There was still half a carton left, and I, thinking that he might want more later and afraid that they might be spilled from my lap and lost underfoot, closed the box and slipped it into the side pocket of my jacket. The special effects for the landing of the second spaceship were well done, but there was something else in the third act that gave me as much pleasure as the cat scene in the second. The final curtain hinges on the device our poets call the Perry's asphodel, a trick so shop-worn now that it is acceptable only if it can be presented in some new light. The one used here was to have John, Ellen's lover, find Creton's handkerchief, and remarking that it seemed perfumed, bury his nose in it. For an instant, the shadow wall used at the beginning of the second act was illuminated again to graphically, or I should say pornographically, present Ellen's desire, conveying to the audience that John had, for that moment, shared the telepathic abilities of Creton, whom all of them had now entirely forgotten. The device was extremely effective and left me feeling that I had by no means wasted my evening. I joined the general applause as the cast appeared to take their bows. Then, as I was turning to leave, I noticed that the old man appeared very ill. I asked if he were all right, and he confessed ruefully that he had eaten too much and thanked me again for my kindness, which must at that time have taken a great deal of resolution. I helped him out of the theater, and when I saw that he had no transportation but his feet, told him I would take him home. He thanked me again and informed me that he had a room at the museum. Thus, the half-block walk from the theater to my hotel was transformed into a journey of 3 or 4 kilometers, taken by moonlight, much of it through rubble-strewn avenues of the deserted parts of the city. During the day, I had hardly glanced at the stark skeleton of the old highway. Tonight, when we walked beneath its ruined overpasses, they seemed inexpressibly ancient and sinister. It occurred to me then that there may be a time flaw such as astronomers report from space somewhere in the Atlantic. How is it that this western shore is more antiquated in the remains of a civilization not yet a century dead than we are in the shadow of Darius? May it not be that every ship that plows that sea moves through 10,000 years? For the past hour, I find I cannot sleep. I have been debating whether to make this entry, but what good is a travel journal if one does not enter everything? I will revise it on the trip home and present a cleansed copy for my mother and Yasmin to read. It appears that the scholars at the museum have no income, but that derived from the sale of treasures gleaned from the past. And I bought a vial of what is supposed to be the greatest creation of the old hallucinatory chemists from the women who helped me get the old man into bed. It was, about half the height of my smallest finger. Very probably it was alcohol and nothing more, though I paid a substantial price. I was sorry I had bought it before I left, and still more sorry when I arrived here, but at the time it seemed that this would be my only opportunity, and I could think of nothing but to seize the adventure. After I have swallowed the drug, I will be able to speak with authority about these things for the remainder of my life. Here is what I have done. I have soaked the porous sugar of one of the eggs with the fluid. The moisture will soon dry up. The drug, if there is a drug, will remain. Then I will rattle the eggs together in an empty drawer, and each day, beginning tomorrow night, I will eat one egg. I am writing today before I go down to breakfast, partly because I suspect that the hotel does not serve so early. Today, I intend to visit the park on the other side of the channel. If is as dangerous as they say, it is very unlikely I will not return to make my entry tonight. If I do return, well, I will plan for that when I am here again. After I had blown out my candle last night, I could not sleep, though I was tired to the bone. Perhaps it was only the excitement of the long walk back from the museum, but I could not free my mind from the image of Ellen. My wandering thoughts associated her with the eggs, and I imagined myself, Creton, sitting up in bed with the cat in my lap. In my daydream, I was not asleep. Ellen brought me my breakfast on a tray, and the breakfast consisted of the 6 candy eggs. When my mind had exhausted itself with this kind of imagery, I decided to have the manager procure a girl for me so that I could rid myself of the accumulated tensions of the voyage. After about an hour during which I sat up reading, he arrived with 3, and when he had given me a glimpse of them through the half-open door, he slipped inside and shut it behind me, leaving them standing in the corridor. I told him I had only asked for one. I know, Mr. Jafarazada, I know, but I thought you might like to have a choice. None of them, from the glimpse I had, resembled Ellen, but I thanked him for his thoughtfulness and suggested that he bring them in. I wanted to tell you first, sir, that you must allow me to set the price with them. I can get them for much less than you, sir, because they know they cannot deceive me, and they must depend on me to bring them to my guests in the future. He named a sum that was in fact quite trivial. That will be fine, I said. Bring them in. He bowed and smiled, making his pinched and miserly face as pleasant as possible, and reminding me very much of a picture I had once seen of an imp summoned before the court of Soliman. But first, sir, I wish to inform you that if you would like all 3 together, you may have them for the price of 2. And should you desire only 2 of the 3, you may have them for 1 and 1/2 the price of 1. All are very lovely, and I thought you might want to consider it. Very well, I have considered it. Show them in. I will light another candle, he said, bustling about the room. There is no charge, sir, for candles at the rate you're paying. I can put the girls on your bill as well. They'll be down as room service. You understand, I'm sure. When the second candle was burning, and he had positioned it to his liking on the nightstand between the 2 beds, he opened the door and waved in the girls, saying, I'll go now. Take what you like and send out the others. I feel certain this was a stratagem. He felt that I would have difficulty in getting any to leave, and so would have to pay for all 3. Yasmin must never see this. That is decided. It is not just that this entire incident would disturb her greatly, but because of what happened next. I was sitting on the bed nearest the door, hoping to decide quickly of the 3 most resembled the girl who had played Ellen. The first was too short, with a wan, pinched face. The second was tall and blonde, but plump. The third, who seemed to stumble as she entered, exactly resembled Yasmin. For a few seconds, I actually believed it was she. Science has so accustomed us to devising and accepting theories to account for the facts we observe, however fantastic, that our minds must begin their manufacture before we are aware of it.
Yasmin had grown lonely for me, as she had booked a passage a few days after my own departure, or perhaps had flown daring the notorious American landing facilities. Arriving here, she had made inquiries at the consulate and was approaching my door as the manager lit his candle and, not knowing what was taking place, had entered with prostitutes he had engaged. It was all moonshine, of course. I jumped to my feet and held up the candle and saw that the third girl, though she had Yasmin's large dark eyes and rounded little chin, was not she. For all her night black hair and her delicate features, she was indisputably an American, and as she came toward me, encouraged no doubt because she had attracted my attention, I saw that, like Creton in the play, she had a club foot. As you see, I returned alive from the park after all. Tonight, before I retire, I will eat an egg, but first I will briefly set down my experiences. The park lies on the opposite side of the Washington Channel between the city and the river. It can be reached by land only at the north end. Not choosing to walk so far and return, I hired a little boat with a tattered red sail to carry me to the southern tip, which is called Haynes Point. Here there was a fountain, I am told, in the old times, but nothing remains of it now. We had clear, sunny spring weather and made our way over exhilarating swells of wave with nothing of the deadly wallowing that oppressed me so much aboard the Princess Fatima. I sat in the bow and watched the rolling greenery of the park on one side of the channel and the ruins of the old fort on the other, while an elderly man handled the tiller and his thin, sun-browned granddaughter, aged about 11, worked the sail. When we rounded the point, the old man told me that for very little he would take me across to Arlington to see the remains of what is supposed to be the largest building of the country's antiquity. I refused, determined to save that experience for another time. We landed where a part of the ancient concrete coping remained intact. The tracks of old roads run up either shore, but I decided to avoid them and made my way up the center, keeping to the highest ground insofar as I could. Once, no doubt, the whole area was devoted to pleasure. Very little remains, however, of the pavilions and statuary that must have dotted the ground. There are little worn away hills that may once have been rockeries, but are now covered with soil and many stagnant pools. In obscure places, I saw the burrows of the famous giant American rats, though I never saw the animals themselves. To judge from their holes, their size has not been exaggerated. There were several I could have entered with ease. The wild dogs, against which I had been warned by both the hotel manager and the old boatman, began to follow me after I had walked about a kilometer north. They are short haired and typically blotched with black and brown, fleckled with white. I would say their average weight was about 25 kilos. With their erect ears and alert, intelligent faces, they did not seem particularly dangerous, but I soon noticed that whichever way I went, the ones in back of me edged nearer. I sat on a stone with my back to a pool and made several quick sketches of them, then decided to try my pistol. They did not seem to know what it was, so I was able to center the red aiming laser very nicely on one big fellow's chest before I pressed the stud for a high energy pulse. For a long time afterward, I heard the melancholy howling of these dogs behind me. Perhaps they were mourning their fallen leader. Twice I came across rusting machines that may have been used to take invalids through the gardens in such fair weather as I myself experienced today. Uncle Mirza says I am a good colorist, but I despair of ever matching the green haunted blacks with which the declining sun painted the park. I met no one until I had almost reached the piers of the abandoned railway bridge. Then 4 or 5 Americans who pretended to beg surrounded me. The dogs, who, as I understand it, live mostly upon the refuse cast up by the river, were honest in their intentions and cleaner in their persons. If these people had been like the pitiful creatures I'd met in the silent city, I would have thrown them a few coins, but they were more or less able bodied men and women who could have worked and chose instead to rob. I told them that I had been forced to kill a countryman of theirs, not mentioning that he was a dog, who had assaulted me, and asked where I could report the matter to the police. At that, they backed off and permitted me to walk around the northern end of the channel in peace, though not without 1,000 savage looks. I returned here without further incident, tired and very well satisfied with my day. I have eaten one of the eggs. I confess I found it difficult to take the first taste, but marshaling my resolution was like pushing at a wall of glass. All at once the resistance snapped, and I picked the thing up and swallowed it in a few bites. It was piercingly sweet, but there was no other flavor. Now we will see. This is more frightening than the park by far. Nothing seemed to be happening, so I went out to dinner. It was twilight, and the carnival spirit of the streets was more marked than ever. Colored lights above all the shops and music from the rooftops where the wealthier natives had private gardens. I've been eating mostly at the hotel, but was told of a good American style restaurant not too far south on Main Street. It was just as described, people sitting on padded benches and alcoves. The tabletops are of a substance like fine grained, greasy, artificial stone. They looked very old. I had the number one dinner, buff colored fish soup with the pasty American bread on the side, followed by a sandwich of ground meat and raw vegetables, doused with the tomato sauce and served on a soft, oily roll. To tell the truth, I did not much enjoy the meal, but it seems a sort of duty to sample more of the American food than I have thus far. I'm very tempted to end the account of my day here, and in fact, I laid down this pen when I had written thus far and made myself ready for bed. Still, what good is a dishonest record? I will let no one see this. Just keep it to read over after I get home. Returning to the hotel from the restaurant, I passed the theater. The thought of seeing Ellen again was irresistible. I bought a ticket and went inside. It was not until I was in my seat that I realized that the bill had changed. The new play was Mary Rose. I saw it done by an English company several years ago with the great authenticity, and it struck me that, like Mary herself, it had far outlived its time. The American production was as inauthentic as the other had been correct. For that reason, it retained, or I should have said it had acquired, a good deal of interest. Americans are superstitious about the interior of their country, not its coasts. So Mary Rose's island had been shifted to one of the huge central lakes. The Highlander, Cameron, had accordingly become a Canadian, played by General Powers's former aide. The Speldings had become the Morlands, and the Morlands had become Americans. Creton was Harry, the knife-throwing wounded soldier, and my Ellen had become Mary Rose. The role suited her so well that I imagined the play had been selected as a vehicle for her. Her height emphasized the character's unnatural immaturity, and her slenderness and the vulnerability of her pale complexion would have told us, I think, if the play had not, that she had been victimized unaware. More importantly than any of these things was a wild and innocent affinity for the supernatural, which she projected to perfection. It was that quality alone, as I now understood, that had made us believe on the preceding night that Creton's spaceship might land in the Spelding's rose garden. He would have been drawn to Ellen, though he had never seen her. Now it made Mary Rose's disappearances and reappearances plausible and even likely. It was as likely that unseen spirits lusted for Mary Rose as the Lieutenant Blake, previously John Randolph, loved her. Indeed, it was more likely, and I had no sooner realized that than the whole mystery of Mary Rose, which had seemed at once inexplicable and banal when I had seen it well played in Tehran, lay clear before me. We of the audience were the envious and greedy spirits. If the Morlands could not see that one wall of their comfortable drawing room was but a sea of dark faces, if Cameron had never noticed that we were the backdrop of his island, the fault was theirs. By rights, then, Mary Rose should have been drawn to us when she vanished. At the end of the second act, I began to look for her. In the beginning of the third, I found her standing silent and unobserved behind the last row of seats. I was only 4 rows from the stage, but I slipped out of my place as unobtrusively as I could and crept up the aisle toward her. I was too late. Before I had gone halfway, it was nearly time for her entrance at the end of the scene. I watched the rest of the play from the back of the theater, but she never returned. Same night. I'm having a good deal of trouble sleeping, though while I was on the ship, I slept 9 hours a night and was off as soon as my head touched the pillow. The truth is that while I lay in bed tonight, I recalled the old curator's remark that the actresses were all prostitutes. If it is true and not simply an expression of hatred for younger people whose bodies are still attractive, then I have been a fool to moan over the thought of Mary Rose and Ellen when I might have had the girl herself. Her name is Artis Dahl. I just looked it up in the playbill. I'm going to the manager's office to consult the city directory there. Writing before breakfast. Found the manager's office locked last night. It was after 2. I put my shoulder against the door and got it opened easily enough. There's no metal socket for the bolt such as we have at home, just a hole mortised in the frame. The directory listed several dolls in the city, but since it was nearly 8 years out of date, it did not inspire a great deal of confidence. I reflected, however, that in a backwater like this, people were not likely to move about so much as we do at home, and that if it were not still of some utility, the manager would not be likely to retain it. So I selected the one that appeared from its address to be the nearest to the theater and set out. The streets were completely deserted. I remember thinking that I was now doing what I had previously been so afraid to do, having been frightened of the city by reading. How ridiculous to suppose that robbers would be afoot now when no one else was. What would they do? Stand for hours at the empty corners? The moon was full and high in the southern sky, showering the street with the lambent white fluid of its light. If it had not been for the sharp, unclean odor so characteristic of American residential areas, I might have thought myself walking through an illustration from some old book of wonder tales, or an actor in some child's pantomime, so bewitched by the scenery that he has forgotten the audience. In writing that, which to tell the truth I did not think of at the time, but only now as I sat here at my table, I realized that that is in fact what must happen to the American girl I have been in the habit of calling Ellen, but must now learn to call Artis. She could never perform as she does if it were not that in some part of her mind her stage became her reality. The shadows about my feet were a century old, tracing faithfully the courses they had determined long before a new Tabriz came to jewel the lunar face with its sapphire. Webbed with thoughts of her, my Ellen, my Mary Rose, my Artis, and with the magic of that pale light that commands all the tides, I was elevated to a degree I cannot well describe. Then I was seized by the thought that everything I felt might be no more than the effect of the drug. I once, like someone who falls from a tower and clutches at the very wisps of air, I tried to return myself to reality. I bit the interior of my cheeks until the blood filled my mouth and struck the unfeeling wall of the nearest building with my fist. In a moment, the pain sobered me. For a quarter hour or more, I stood at the curbside, spitting into the gutter and trying to clean and bandage my knuckles with strips torn from my handkerchief. 1,000 times I thought what a sight I would be if it did not fact succeed in seeing Ellen, and I comforted myself with the thought that if she were indeed a prostitute, it would not matter to her. I could offer her a few additional reals, and all would be well. Yet that thought was not really much comfort. Even when a woman sells her body, a man flatters himself that she would not do so quite so readily were he not who he is. At the very moment I drooled blood into the street, I was congratulating myself on the strong, square face so many have admired, and wondering how I should apologize if in kissing her I smeared her mouth with red. Perhaps it was some faint sound that brought me to myself. Perhaps it was only the consciousness of being watched. I drew my pistol and turned this way and that, but saw nothing. Yet the feeling endured. I began to walk again, and if there was any sense of unreality remaining, it was no longer the unearthly exultation I had felt earlier. After a few steps, I stopped and listened. A dry sound of rattling and scraping had followed me. It too stopped now. As nearing the address I had taken from the directory, I confess my mind was filled with fancies in which I was rescued by Ellen herself, who in the end should be more frightened than I, but who would risk her lovely person to save mine. Yet I knew these were but fancies, and the thing pursuing me was not, though it crossed my mind more than once that it might be some drudge made to seem visible and palpable to me. Another block and I had reached the address. It was a house no different from those on either side, built of the rubble of buildings that were older still, three-storied, heavy doored, and almost without windows. There was a bookshop on the ground floor, to judge by an old sign, with living quarters above it. I crossed the street to see it better and stood, wrapped again in my dream, staring at the single thread of yellow light that showed between the shutters of a gable window. As I watched that light, the feelings of being watched myself grew upon me. Time passed, slipping through the waste of the universe's great hourglass, like the eroded soil of this continent slipping down her rivers to the seas. And at last, my fear and desire for Ellen, fear of whatever it was that glared at me with invisible eyes, drove me to the door of the house. I hammered the wood with the butt of my pistol, though I know how unlikely it was that any American would answer a knock at such a time of night, and when I had knocked several times, I heard slow steps from within. The door creaked open until it was caught by a chain. I saw a gray-haired man, fully dressed, holding an old-fashioned long-barreled gun. Behind him, a woman lifted a stub of smoking candle to let him see, and though she was clearly much older than Ellen and was marked, moreover, by the deformities so prevalent here, there was a certain nobility in her features and a certain beauty as well, so that I was reminded of the fallen statue that is said to have stood on an island farther north, and which I have seen pictured. I told the man that I was a traveler, true enough, and that I had just arrived by boat from Arlington and had no place to stay, and so had walked into the city until I had noticed the light of this window. I would pay, I said, a silver real if they would only give me in bed for the night and breakfast in the morning, and I showed them the coin. My plan was to become a guest in the house so that I might discover whether Ellen was indeed one of the inhabitants. If she was, it would have been an easy matter to prolong my stay. The woman tried to whisper in her husband's ear, but save for a look of nervous irritation, he ignored her. I don't dare let a stranger in. From his voice, I might have been a lion, and his gun a trainer's chair. Not with no one here but my wife and myself. I see, I told him. I quite understand your position. You might try the house on the corner, he said, shutting the door, but don't tell them Doll sent you. I heard the heavy bar dropped into place at the final word. I turned away, and then by the mercy of Allah, who is indeed compassionate, happened to glance back one last time at the thread of yellow between the shutters of the high windows. A flicker of scarlet higher still caught my attention, perhaps only because the light of the setting moon had bathed the rooftop from a new angle. I think the creature I glimpsed there had been waiting to leap upon me from behind, but when our eyes met, it launched itself toward me. I had barely time to lift my pistol before it struck me and slammed me to the broken pavement of the street. For a brief period, I think I lost consciousness. If my shot had not killed the thing as it fell, I would not be sitting here writing this journal this morning. After half a minute or so, I came to myself enough to thrust its weight away and stand up and rub my bruises. No one had come to my aid, but neither had anyone rushed from the surrounding houses to kill and rob me. I was as alone with the creature that lay dead at my feet as I had been when I only stood watching the window in the house from which it had sprung. After I found my pistol and assured myself that it was still in working order, I dragged the thing to a spot of moonlight. When I glimpsed it on the roof, it had seemed a feral dog like the one I had shot in the park. When it lay dead before me, I thought it was a human being. In the moonlight, I saw it was neither, or perhaps both. There was a blunt muzzle and the height of the skull above the eyes, which anthropologists say is the surest badge of humanity in speech, had been stunted until it was not greater than I had seen in a macaque. Yet the arms and shoulders and pelvis, even a few filthy rags of clothing, all bespoke mankind. It was female, with small, flattened breasts still apparent on either side of the burn channel. At least 10 years ago, I read about such things in Osman Aga's Mystery Beyond the Sun Setting, but it was very different to stand shivering on a deserted street corner of the old capital and examine the thing in the flesh. By Osman Aga's account, which no one, I think, but a few old women has ever believed, these creatures were in truth human beings, or at least the descendants of human beings. In the last century, when the famine gripped their country and the irreversible damage done to their chromosomal structures of the people had already become apparent, some few turned to the eating of human flesh. No doubt the corpses of the famine supplied their food at first, and no doubt those who ate of them congratulated themselves that by so doing they had escaped the effects of the enzymes that were then still used to bring slaughter animals to maturity in a matter of months. What they failed to realize was that the bodies of the human beings they ate had accumulated far more of these unnatural substances than were ever found in the flesh of the short lived cattle. From them, according to Mystery Beyond the Sun Setting, rose such creatures as the thing I had killed. But Osman Aga had never been believed. So far as I know, he is a mere popular writer with a reputation for glorifying Caspian resorts in recompense for free lodging, and for indulging in absurd expeditions to breed more books and publicize the ones he has already written, crossing the desert on a camel and the Alps on an elephant, and no one else has ever, to my knowledge, reported such things from the continent. The ruined cities filled with rats and rabid bats and terrible whirling dust storms of the interior have been enough for other travel writers. Now I am sorry I did not contrive a way to cut off the thing's head. I feel sure its skull would have been of interest to science. As soon as I had written the preceding paragraph, I realized that there must still be a chance to do what I had failed to do last night. I went to the kitchen. For a small bribe, was able to secure a large, sharp knife, which I concealed beneath my jacket. It was still early as I ran down the street, and for a few minutes I had high hopes that the thing's body might still be laying where I had left it. But my efforts were all for nothing. It was gone. There was no sign of its presence, no blood, no scar from my beam on the house. I poked into alleys and waste cans, nothing. At last I came back to the hotel for a breakfast, and I have now, it is mid morning, returned to my room to make my plans for the day. Very well. I failed to meet Ellen last night. I shall not fail today. I'm going to buy another ticket for the play, and tonight I will not take my seat, but wait behind the last row where I saw her standing. If she comes to watch at the end of the second act, as she did last night, I will be there to compliment her on her performance and present her with some gift. If she does not come, I will make my way backstage. From what I have seen of these Americans, a quarter real should get me anywhere. but I am willing to loosen a few teeth if I must. What absurd creatures we are. I have just reread what I wrote this morning, and I might as well have been writing of the philosophic speculations of the Congress of Birds or the affairs of the demons in Dom Daniel, or any other subject on which neither I nor anyone else knows or can know a thing. Oh, book, you have heard what I suppose would occur. Now let me tell you what actually took place. I set out as I had planned to procure a gift for Ellen on the advice of the hotel manager. I followed Main Street north until I reached the wide avenue that passes close by the obelisk. Around the base of the still imposing monument is held a perpetual fair in which the merchants use the stone blocks fallen from the upper part of the structure as tables. What remains of this shaft is still, I should say, upward of 100 meters high, but it is said to have formerly stood 3 or 4 times that height. Much of that fallen material has been carted away to build private homes. There seems to be no logic to the prices in this country, save for the general rule that foodstuffs are cheap and imported machinery, cameras, and the like costly. Textiles are expensive, which no doubt explains why so many of the people wear ragged clothes that they mend and dye in an effort to make them look new. Certain kinds of jewelry are quite reasonable. Others sell for much larger prices than they would in Tehran. Rings of silver or white gold set, usually with a single modest diamond, may be had in great numbers for such low prices that I was tempted into buying a few to take home as an investment. Yet I saw bracelets that would have sold at home for no more than half a rial, for which the seller asked 10 times that much. There are many interesting antiques, all of which are alleged to have been dug from the ruined cities of the interior at the cost of someone's life. When I had talked to 5 or 6 vendors of such items, I was able to believe that I knew how the country was depopulated. After a good deal of this pleasant, wordy shopping, during which I spent very little, I selected a bracelet made of old coins, many of them silver, as my gift to Ellen. I reasoned that women always like jewelry, and that such a showy piece might be of service to an actress in playing some part or other, and that the coins must have a good deal of intrinsic value. Whether she will like it or not, if she ever receives it, I do not know. It is still in the pocket of my jacket. When the shadow of the obelisk had grown long, I returned here to the hotel and had a good dinner of lamb and rice, and retired to groom myself for the evening. The 5 remaining candy eggs stood staring at me from the top of my dresser. I remembered my resolve and took one. Quite suddenly, I was struck by the conviction that the demon I believed I had killed that night before had been no more than a phantom engendered by the action of the drug. What if I had been firing my pistol at mere empty air? That seemed a terrible thought. It seems to me it seems so to me still. A worse one is that the drug really may have rendered visible, as some say those ancient preparations were intended to, a real but spiritual being. If such things in fact walk what we take to be unoccupied rooms and rooftops in the empty streets of night, it would explain many sudden deaths and diseases, and perhaps the sudden changes for the worse we sometimes see in others, and others in us, and even the birth of evil men. This morning I called the thing a druge. It may be true. Yet if the drug had been in the egg I ate last night, then the egg I held was harmless. Concentrating on that thought, I forced myself to eat it all. Then I stretched myself upon the bed to wait. Very briefly I slept and dreamed. Ellen was bending over me, caressing me with a soft, long-fingered hand. It was only for an instant, but sufficient to make me hope that dreams were prophecies. If the drug was in the egg I consumed, the dream was its only result. I got up and washed, changed my clothes, sprinkling my fresh shirt liberally with our premier rose water, which I have observed the Americans hold in high regard. Making certain my ticket and pistol were both in place, I left for the theater. The play was still Mary Rose. I intentionally entered late after Harry and Mrs. Ottery had been talking for several minutes, then lingered at the back of the last row as though I were too polite to disturb the audience by taking my seat. Mrs. Ottery made her exit. Harry pulled his knife from the wood of the packing case and threw it again, and when the mists of the past had marched across the stage, Harry was gone, and Moreland and the parson were chatting to the tune of Mrs. Moreland's knitting needles. Mary Rose would be on stage soon. My hope that she would come out to watch the opening scene had come to nothing. I would have to wait until she vanished at the end of Act Two before I could expect to see her. I was looking for a vacant seat when I became conscious of someone standing near me. In the dim light, I could tell little except that he was rather slender and a few centimeters shorter than I. Finding no seat, I moved back a step or two. The newcomer touched my arm and asked in a whimper if I could light a cigarette. I had already seen that it was customary to smoke in the theaters here, and I had fallen into the habit of carrying matches to light the candles in my room. The flare of the flame showed the narrow eyes and high cheekbones of Harry, or, as I preferred to think of him, Creton. Taken somewhat aback, I murmured some inane remark about the excellence of his performance. Did you like it? It was the least of all parts. I pull the curtain to open the show and then pull it again to tell everyone it's time to go home. Several people in the audience were looking angrily at us, so we retreated to a point at the head of the aisle that was at least legally in the lobby, where I told him that I had seen him in Visit to a Small Planet as well. Now there's a play. The character, as I am sure you saw, is good and bad at once. He is benign, he is mischievous, he is hellish. You carried it off wonderfully well, I thought. Thank you. This turkey here, do you know how many rolls it has? Well, there's yourself, Mrs. Ottery, Mr. Amy. No, no. He touched my arm to stop me. I mean rolls. Parts that require real acting. There's one, the girl. She gets to skip about the stage as an 18-year-old whose brain atrophied at 10, and at least half what she does is wasted on the audience because they don't realize what's wrong with her until Act 1 is almost over. She's wonderful, I said. I mean, Madame Dahl. Creton nodded and drew on a cigarette. She is a very competent ingenue, though it would be better if she weren't quite so tall. Do you think there's any chance that she might come out here, as you did? Ah, he said, and looked me up and down. For a moment, I could have sworn that the telepathic ability he was credited with in Visit to a Small Planet was no fiction. Nevertheless, I repeated my question. Is it probable or not? There's no reason to get angry. No, it's not likely. Is that enough payment for your match? She vanishes at the end of the second act and doesn't come on stage again until the close of the third. Creton smiled. You've read the play? I was here last night. She must be off for nearly 40 minutes, including the intermission. That's right, but she won't be here. It's true she goes out front sometimes, as I did myself tonight, but I happen to know she has company backstage. Might I ask who? You might. It's even possible, I might answer. You're a Muslim, I suppose. Do you drink? I'm not a strict Muslim, but no, I don't. I'll buy you a drink gladly enough if you want one and have coffee with you while you drink it. We left by a side door and elbowed our way through the crowd in the street. A flight of narrow and dirty steps descending from the sidewalk led us to a cellar tavern that had all the atmosphere of a private club. There's a bar with a picture, now much dimmed by dirt and smoke, of the cast of a play I did not recognize behind it. 3 tables and a few alcoves. Creton and I slipped into one of these and ordered from a barman with a misshapen head. I suppose I must have stared at him because Creton said, I sprained my ankle stepping out of a saucer and now I'm a convalescent soldier. Should we make up something for him too? Can't we just say the potter is angry sometimes? The potter? I asked. None answered this, but after silence spake, a vessel of a more ungainly make. They sneer at me for leaning all awry. What did the hand then of the potter shake? I shook my head. I've never heard that, but you're right. It looks as though his head has been shaped in clay, then knocked in on one side until it is still wet. This is a republic of hideousness, as you have no doubt already seen. Our national symbol is supposed to be an extinct eagle. It is, in fact, the nightmare. I find it a very beautiful country, I said, though I confess that many of your people are unsightly. Still, there are the ruins, and you have such skies as we never see at home. Our chimneys have been filled with wind for a long time. That might be for the best. Blue skies are better than most of the things made in factories. And not all our people are unsightly, Creton murmured. Oh no, Madame Dahl. I had myself in mind. I saw that he was baiting me, but I said, no, you aren't hideous. In fact, I would call you handsome in an exotic way. Unfortunately, my tastes run more towards Madame Dahl. Call her artist. She won't mind. The barman brought Creton a glass of green liqueur and me a cup of the weak, bitter American coffee. You're going to tell me who she is entertaining. Behind the scenes, Creton smiled. I just thought of that. I've used that phrase 1,000 times. I suppose everyone has. This time it happens to be literally correct, and its birth is suddenly made plain, like Oedipus's. No, I don't think I promised I would tell you that, though I suppose I said I might. Aren't there other things you would really rather know? The secret hidden beneath Mount Rushmore, or how you might meet her yourself? I'll give you 20 reals to introduce me to her with some assurance that something will come of the introduction. No one need ever find out. Creon laughed. Believe me, I would be more likely to boast of my profit than keep it secret, though I would probably have to divide my fee with the lady to fulfill the guarantee. You'll do it then? He shook his head, still laughing. I only pretend to be corrupt. It goes with this face. Come backstage after the show tonight, and I'll see that you meet artists. You're very wealthy, I presume, and if you're not, we'll say you are anyway. What are you doing here? Studying your art and architecture. Great reputation in your own country, no doubt. I'm a pupil of Akon Mizra Amak, who he has a great reputation, surely. He even came here 30 years ago to examine the miniatures in your National Gallery of Art. Pupil of Akon Mirza Amak, pupil of Akon Mirza Amak, Kraton murmured to himself. That is very good. I must remember it. But now, he glanced at the old clock behind the bar. It's time we got back. I'll have to freshen my makeup before I go on in the last act. Would you prefer to wait in the theater or just come around to the stage door when the play's over? I'll give you a card that will get you right in. I'll wait in the theater, I said, feeling that would offer less chance for mishap. Also, because I wanted to see Ellen play the ghost again. Come along then. I have a key for that side door. I rose to go with him, and he threw an arm around my shoulder that I felt being polite to thrust away. I could feel his hand, as cold as a dead man's, through my clothing. I was reminded unpleasantly of the twisted hands of the beggar in the silent city. We were going up the narrow stairs when I felt a gentle touch inside my jacket. My first thought was that he had seen the outline of my pistol and meant to take it and shoot me. I gripped his wrist and shouted something. I do not remember what. Bound together and struggling, we staggered up the steps and into the street. In a few seconds, we were the center of a mob, some taking his side, some mine, most only urging us to fight or asking each other what the disturbance was. My pocket sketch pad, which he must have thought held money, fell to the ground between us. Just then, the American police arrived, not by air as the police would have come at home, but astride shaggy, hulking horses and swinging whips. The crowd scattered at the first cracking arc from the lashes, and in a few seconds they had beaten Creton to the ground. Even at the time, I could not help thinking what a terrible thing it must be to be one of those people whose police are so quick to prefer any prosperous looking foreigner to one of their own citizens. They asked me what had happened. My questioner even dismounted to show his respect for me, and I explained that Creton had tried to rob me, but I did not want him punished. The truth was that seeing him sprawled unconscious with a burn across his face had put an end to any resentment I might have felt toward him. Out of pity, I would gladly have given him the few reals I carried. They told me that if he had attempted to rob me, he must be charged, and that if I would not accuse him, they would do so themselves. I then said that Creton was a friend, and that on reflection I felt certain that he had been attempting had what he had been attempting had been intended as a prank. In maintaining this, I was considerably handicapped by not knowing his real name, which I had read on the playbill but forgotten, so that I was refer to him as this poor man. At last, the policeman said, "We can't leave him in the street, so we'll have to bring him in. How will it look if there's no complaint? If there's no complaint?" Then I understood that they were afraid of what their superiors might say if it had become known that they had beaten him unconscious when no charge was made against him, and when I became aware that if I would not press charges, the charges they would bring themselves would be far more serious, assault or attempted murder. I agreed to do what they wished and signed a form alleging the theft of my sketchbook. When they had gone at last carrying the unfortunate Creton across a saddle bow, I tried to re-enter the theater. The side door through which we had left was locked, and though I would gladly have paid the price of another ticket, the box office was closed. Seeing that there was nothing further to be done, I returned here, telling myself that my introduction to Ellen, if it ever come, would have to wait for another day. Very truly, it is written that we walk by paths that are always turning. In recording these several pages, I have managed to restrain my enthusiasm, though when I described my waiting at the back of the theater for artists, and again when I recounted how Creton had promised to introduce me to her, I was forced for minutes at a time to lay down my pen and walk about the room singing and whistling, and to reveal everything, jumping over the beds. But now I can conceal no longer. I have seen her, I have touched her hand, I am to see her again tomorrow, and there's every hope that she will become my mistress. If you're keeping track of the days, I believe that's the third day. I had undressed and laid myself on the bed, or maybe it's the fourth day. Anyway, the next day. I had undressed and laid myself in the bed, thinking to bring this journal up to date in the morning, and had even fallen into the first doze of sleep when there was a knock at the door. I slipped into my robe and pressed the release. It was the only time in my life that for even an instant I thought I might be dreaming, actually asleep, when in truth I was often awake. How feeble it is to write that she is more beautiful in person than she appears on the stage. It is true, and yet it is a supreme irrelevance. I have seen more beautiful women. Indeed, Yasmin is, I suppose, by the formal standards of art, more lovely. It is not artist's beauty that draws me to her, the hair like gold, the translucent skin that then still showed traces of the bluish makeup she had worn as a ghost, the flashing eyes like the clear, clean skies of America. It is something deeper than that, something that would remain if all that were somehow taken away. No doubt, She has habits that would disgust me in someone else, and the vanity that is said to be so common in her profession, and yet I would do anything to possess her. Enough of this. What is it but empty boasting, now that I am on the point of winning her? She stood in my doorway. I have been trying to think how I can express what I felt then. It was as though some tall flower, or lily perhaps, had left the garden and come to tap at my door, a thing that had never happened before in all the history of the world and would never happen again. You are Nadan Jafarazada? I admitted that I was, and shamefacedly, 20 seconds too late, moved out of her way. She entered, but instead of taking the chair I indicated, turned to face me. Her blue eyes seemed as large as the colored eggs on the dresser, and they were filled with a melting hope. You are the man, then, that Bobby O'Keene tried to rob tonight. I nodded. I know you. I mean, I know your face. This is insane. You came to visit on the last night and brought your father, and then to Mary Rose on the first night and sat in the third or fourth row. I thought you were an American, and when the police told me your name, I imagined some greasy fat man with gestures. Why on earth would Bobby want to steal from you? Perhaps he needed the money. She threw back her head and laughed. I had heard her name and her laugh in Mary Rose when Simon was asking her father for her hand, but that had held a note of childishness, however well suited to the part, detracted from its beauty. The laugh was the merriment of ours sliding down a rainbow. I'm sure he did. He always needs money. You're sure, though, that he meant to rob you? You couldn't have. She saw my expression and let the question trail away. The truth is that I was disappointed that I could not oblige her, and at last I said, if you want me to be mistaken, artist, then I was mistaken. He only bumped against me on the steps, perhaps, and tried to catch my sketchbook when it fell. She smiled, and her face was the sun smiling upon roses. You would say that for me? And you know my name? From the program. I came to the theater to see you, and that was not my father, who it grieves me to say is long dead, but only an old man, an American, whom I had met that day. You brought him sandwiches at the first intermission. I was watching you through the peephole in the curtain. You must be a very thoughtful person. Do you watch everyone in the audience so carefully? She blushed at that, and for a moment could not meet my eyes. But you will forgive Bobby and tell the police that you want them to let him go? You must love the theater, Mr. Jaff. You've forgotten my name already as Jafarazada, a very commonplace name in my country. I haven't forgotten it, only how to pronounce it. You see, when I came here, I learned it without knowing who you were, so I had no trouble with it. Now you're a real person to me, and I can't say it as an actress should. She seemed to notice the chair behind her for the first time and sat down. I sat opposite her. I'm afraid I know very little about the theater. We are trying to keep it alive here, Mr. Jafar, and Jafarazada. Call me Nada. Then you won't have so many syllables to trip over. She took my hand in hers, and I knew quite well that the gesture was as studied as a salaam and that she felt she was playing me like a fish. But I was beside myself with delight. To be played by her, to have her eager to cultivate my affection. And the fish will pull her in yet. Wait and see. I will, she said, not on. And though you may know little of the theater, you feel as I do, as we do, or you would not come. It has been such a long struggle. All the history of the stage is a struggle. The gasping of a beautiful child born at the point of death, the moralists, censorship and oppression, technology, and now poverty have all tried to destroy her. Only we, the actors and audiences, have kept her alive. We have been doing well here in Washington, not on. Very well indeed, I said. Both the productions I have seen here have been excellent, but only for the past two seasons. When I joined the company, it had nearly fallen apart. We revived it, Bobby and Paul and I. We could do it because we cared and because we were able to find a few naturally talented people who can take direction. Bobby's the best of us. He can walk away with any part that calls for a touch of the sinister. She seemed to run out of breath. I said, I don't think there will be any trouble about getting him free. Thank God. We're getting the theater on its feet again now. We're attracting new people, and we've built up a following, people who come to see every production. There's even some money ahead at last, but Mary Rose is supposed to run another 2 weeks, and then after that we're doing Faust with Bobby as Mephistopheles. We've simply no one who can take his place, no one who can come close to him. I'm sure the police will release him if I ask them. They must. We have to have him tomorrow night. Bill, someone you don't know, tried to go on for him in the third act tonight. It was just ghastly. And Iran, you're very polite. That's what I've heard. We enjoy thinking so. We're not. We never were, and as her voice trailed away, but a wave of one slender arm evoked everything. The cracked plaster walls became as air, and the decayed city, the ruined continent, entered the room with us. I understand, I said. They, we were betrayed, and our souls, we have never been sure by whom. When we feel cheated, we are ready to kill, and maybe we feel cheated all the time. She slumped in her chair, and I realized I should have long before how exhausted she was. She had given a performance that had ended in disaster, then had been forced to plead with the police for my name and address, and at last had come here from the station house, very probably on foot. I asked when I could obtain O'Keen's release. We can go to tomorrow morning if you'll do it. You wish to come too? She nodded, smoothed her skirt, and stood. I'll have to know. I'll have to know. I'll come for you about 9, if it's all right. If you'll wait outside for me to dress, I'll take you home. That's not necessary. It will only take a moment, I said. The blue eyes held something pleading again. You're going to come in with me. That's what you're thinking, I know. You have 2 beds here, bigger, cleaner beds than the one I have in my little apartment. If I were to ask you to push them together, would you still take me home afterward? It was as though I were dreaming indeed, a dream in which everything I wanted, the cosmos purified, delivered itself to me. I said, You won't have to leave at all. You can spend the night with me. Then we can breakfast together before we go to release your friend. She laughed again, lifting that exquisite head. There are 100 things at home I need. Do you think I'd have breakfast with you without my cosmetics and in these dirty clothes? Then I will take you home, yes, though you lived in Casvin or on Mount Calf. She smiled. Get dressed then. I'll wait outside, and I'll show you my apartment. Perhaps you won't want to come back here afterward. She went out, her wooden soled American shoes clicking on the bare floor, and I threw my trousers, shirt, and jacket and jammed my feet into my boots. Though I opened the door, she was gone. I rushed the barrel window at the end of the corridor. I was in time to see her disappear down a side street. A last swirl of her skirt in a gust of night wind, and she had vanished into the velvet dark. For a long time I stood there looking out over the ruinous buildings. I was not angry. I don't think I could be angry with her. I was, though here it is hard to tell the truth in some way, glad, not because I feared the embrace of love. I have no doubt of my ability to suffice any woman who can be sated by man, but because an easy exchange of my cooperation for her person would have failed to satisfy my need for romance, for adventure of a certain type, in which danger and love are intertwined like coupling serpents. Artist, my Ellen, will provide that, surely, as neither Yasmin nor the pitiful wanton who was her double could. I sense that the world is opening for me only now that I am being born, that the corridor was the birth canal, and that artist, in leaving me, was drawing me toward her. When I returned to my own door, I noticed a bit of paper on the floor before it. I transcribed it exactly here, though I cannot transmit its scent of lilacs. You're a most attractive man, and I want very much to stretch the truth and tell you you can have me freely when Bobby is free, but I won't sell myself, etc. Really, I will sell myself for Bobby, but I have other fish to fry tonight. I'll see you in the morning, and if you can get Bobby out or even try, you'll have real love from the vanishing. Mary Rose. Morning. Woke early and ate here at the hotel as usual, finishing about 8. Writing this journal will give me something to do while I wait for artists. Had an American breakfast today, the first time I have risked one. Flakes of pastry dough, toasted crisp and drenched with cream, and with it strudel and the usual American coffee. Most natives have spiced pork in one form or another, which I cannot bring myself to try, but several of the people around me were having egg dishes and oven warmed bread, which I will sample tomorrow. I had a very unpleasant dream last night. I've been trying to put it out of my mind ever since I woke. It was dark, and I was under an open sky with artists walking over ground much rougher than anything I saw in the park on the farther side of the channel. One of the hideous creatures I shot night before last were pursuing us, or rather, lurking about us, for it appeared first to the left of us, then to the right, silhouetted against the night sky. Each time we saw it, artist grasped my arm and urged me to shoot, but the little indicator light on my pistol was glowing red to show that there was not enough charge left for a shot. All very silly, of course, but I'm going to buy a fresh power pack as soon as I have the opportunity. It is late afternoon, after 6. We have not had dinner yet. I'm just out of the tub and sit here naked with face candy egg laid, pinker even than I, beside this book on my table. Artist and I had a sorry, weary time of it, and I have come back here to make myself presentable. At 7, we will meet for dinner. The curtain goes up at 8, so it can't be a long one, but I'm going backstage to watch the play from the wings, where I'll be able to talk to her when she isn't performing. I just took a bite of the egg. No unusual taste, nothing but an unpleasant sweetness. The more I reflect on it, the more inclined I am to believe that the drug was in the first I ate. No doubt the monster I saw had been lurking in my brain since I read mysteries and the drug freed it. True, there was bloodstains on my clothes, the Perry's asphodel, but they could as easily have come from my cheek, which is still sore. I've had my experience, and all I have left is my candy. I am almost tempted to throw out the rest. Another bite. Still 20 minutes before I must dress and go for Artis. She showed me where she lives, only a few doors from the theater, to work then. Artis was a trifle late this morning, but came as she had promised. I asked where we were going to free Creton, and she told me, a still living building at the eastern end of the silent city. I hired one of the rickety American calaches to drive us there. Like most of them, it was drawn by a starved horse, but we made good time. The American police are organized in a peculiar system. The National Secret Police, officially the Federated Inquiry Divisions, are in a tutorial position to all the others, having power to review their decisions, promote, demote, and discipline, and as the ultimate reward, enroll personnel from the other organizations. In addition, they maintain a uniform force of their own. Thus, when an American has been arrested by uniform police, his friends can seldom learn whether he's been taken by the local police, by the FID uniform national force, or by members of the FID secret police posing as either of the foregoing. Since I had known nothing of these distinctions previously, I had no way of guessing which of the three had O'Keen, but the local police to whom Artis had spoken the night before had given her to understand that he had been taken by them. She explained all this to me as we rode along, then added that we were now going to the FID building to secure his release. I must have looked as confused as I felt at this because she added, part of it is a station for the Washington Police Department. They rent the space from the FID. My own impression when we arrived was that they did no such thing, that the entire apparatus was no more real than one of the scenes in Artis's theater, and that all the men and women to whom we spoke were in fact agents of the secret police, wielding 10 times the authority they pretended to possess, and going through a solemn ritual of deception. As Artis and I moved from office to office explaining our simple errand, I came to think that she felt as I did, and that she had refrained from expressing these feelings to me in the cab, not only because of the danger, the fear that I might betray her, the driver, be a spy, but because she was ashamed of her nation and eager to make it appear to me, a foreigner, that her government was less devious and meretricious than is actually the case. If this is so, and in that windowless warren of stone I was certain it was, then this very explanation she proffered in the cab, which I have given in its proper place, differentiating clearly between local police, uniformed FID police, and secret police, was no more than a children's fable concealing an actuality less forthright and more convoluted. Our questioners were courteous to me, much less so to Artis, and so it seemed to me, obsessed by the idea that something more lay behind the simple incident we described over and over again. So much so, in fact, that I came to believe it myself. I have neither time nor patience enough to describe all these interviews, but I'll attempt to give a sample of one. We went into a small windowless office crowded between two others that appeared empty. A middle aged American woman was seated behind a metal desk. She appeared normal and reasonably attractive until she spoke. Then her scarred gums showed that she had once had 2 or 3 times the proper number of teeth, 40 or 50, I suppose, in each jaw, and that the dental surgeon who had extracted the supernumerary ones had not always, perhaps, selected those he suffered to remain as wisely as he might. She asked, how is it outside? The weather? You see, I don't know, sitting in here all day. Artis said, very nice. Do you like it, Haji? Have you had a pleasant stay in our great country? I don't think it has rained since I've been here. She seemed to take that remark as a covert accusation. You came too late for the rains, I'm afraid. This is a very fertile area, however. Some of our oldest coins show heads of wheat. Have you seen them? She pushed a small copper coin across the desk, and I pretended to examine it. There are 1 or 2 like it in the bracelet I bought for Artis, which I still have not presented to her. I must apologize on behalf of the district for what happened to you, the woman continued. We're making every effort to control crime. You have not been victimized before this? I shook my head, half suffocated in that airless office, and said I had not been. And now you are here. She shuffled the papers she held and pretended to read from one of them. You are here to secure the release of the thief who assaulted you. A very commendable act of your magnanimity. May I ask why you brought this young woman with you? She does not seem to be mentioned in any of the reports. I explained that Artis was a co-worker of O'Keen's and that she had interceded for him. Then it is you, Miss Dahl, who are really interested in securing this prisoner's release. Are you related to him? And so on. In the conclusion of each interview, we were told either that the matter was completely out of the hands of the person to whom we had just spent half an hour talking, that it was necessary to obtain a clearance from someone else, or that an additional deposition had to be made. About 2 o'clock, we were sent to the other side of the river into what my guidebooks insist is an entirely different jurisdiction to visit a penal facility. There we were forced to look for Creton among 500 or so miserable prisoners, all of whom stank and had lice. Not finding him, we returned to the FID building past the half overturned and yet still brooding figure called the Seated Man and the ruins and beggars of the Silent City for another round of interrogations. By 5, when we were told to leave, we were both exhausted, though Artis seemed surprisingly hopeful. When I left her at the door of her building a few minutes ago, I asked her what they might do tonight without Creton. Without Harry, you mean? She smiled. The best we can, I suppose, if we must. At least Paul will have somebody ready to stand in for him tonight. We shall see how well it goes. Hold up, I really need some water. My mouth is dry as hell. Ooh, I love the little things like that. The Seated Man is really like the statue of the Thinker, which is a statue of Dante, which is actually a statue called the Gates of Hell. So we can sort of see, they're sending him to the Gates of Hell. Anyway, Gene Wolfe loves to do fun stuff like that. He hides things right in plain sight, like in people misunderstanding the things. But you, as the reader, can have a sort of that's what this whole story is really about: is you having a greater context than anyone involved in it, so you can actually figure out what really happened. It's like a big detective story in that way for you. Anyway, back to the story. I picked up this pen and replaced it on the table 10 times at least. It seems very likely that I should destroy this journal instead of continuing with it where I was, but I've discovered a hiding place for it which I think will be secure. When I came back from Artis's apartment tonight, there were only 2 candy eggs remaining. I'm certain, absolutely certain, that 3 are left when I went to meet Artis. I am almost equally sure that after I had finished making the entry in this book, I put it, as I always do, at the left side of the drawer. It was on the right side. Is it possible that all this is merely the doing of the maid who cleans the room? She might easily have supposed that a single candy egg would not be missed and have shifted this book while cleaning the drawer or peeped inside out of curiosity. I'll assume the worst, however. An agent sent to investigate my room might be equipped to photograph these pages, but he might not, and it's not likely that he himself would have a reading knowledge of Farsi. Now I have gone through the book and eliminated all the passage relating to my reason for visiting this leprous country. Before I leave this room tomorrow, I'll arrange indicators, hairs, and other objects whose positions I shall carefully record. They'll tell me if this room has been searched again. Now I may as well set down the events of the evening, which were truly extraordinary enough. I met Artis as we had planned, and she directed me to a small restaurant not far from her apartment. We had no sooner seated ourselves than 2 heavy-looking men entered. At no time could I see plainly the face of either, but it appeared to me that one was the American I had met abroad, the Princess Fatima, and the other was the grain dealer I had so assiduously avoided there, Golam Gesson. It is impossible, I think, for my divine Artis ever to look less than beautiful, but she came as near to it then as the laws of nature permit. The blood drained from her face, her mouth opened slightly, and for a moment she appeared to be a lovely corpse. I began to ask what the trouble was, but before I could utter a word, she touched my lips to silence me, and then, having somewhat regained her composure, said, "They have not seen us. I am leaving now. Follow me," as though we were finished eating. She stood, feigned to pat her lips with a napkin so that the lower half of her face was hidden, and walked out into the street. I followed her and found her laughing, not 3 doors away from the entrance to the restaurant. The change in her could not have been more startling if she had been released from an enchantment. "It is so funny," she said, "though it wasn't then. Come on, we'd better go. You can feed me after the show." I asked her what those men were to her. "Friends," she said, still laughing. "If they are friends, why were you so anxious that they not see you? Were you afraid that they might make us late?" I knew evading the question if she did not want to confide in me. She shook her head. "No, no, I didn't want either to think I did not trust him. I'll tell you more later if you want to involve yourself in our little charade." "With all my heart." She smiled at that sun-drenched smile for which I would gladly have entered a lion pit. In a few more steps, we were at the rear entrance to the theater, and there was no time to say more. She opened the door, and I heard Creton arguing with a woman I later learned was the wardrobe mistress. "You are free," I said, and he turned to look at me. "Yes, thanks to you, I think, and I do thank you." Artis gazed on him as though he were a child saved from drowning. "Poor Bobby. Was it very bad?" "It was frightening, that's all. I was afraid I'd never get out." "Do you know Terry is gone?" She shook her head and said, "What do you mean?" But I was certain, and here I am not exaggerating or coloring the facts, though I confess I've occasionally done so elsewhere in this chronicle, that she had known it before he spoke. "He simply isn't here. Paul is running around like a lunatic. I hear you missed me last night." God, yes, Artis said, and darted off too swiftly for me to follow. Creton took my arm. I expected him to apologize for having tried to rob me, but he said, "You've met her, I see. She persuaded me to drop the charges against you. Whatever it was you offered me, 20 reals, I'm morally entitled to it, but I won't claim it. Come and see me when you're ready for something more wholesome. And meanwhile, how do you like her?" "That is something for me to tell her," I said, "not you." Artis returned as I spoke, bringing with her a balding black man with a mustache. "Paul, this is Nadan. His English is very good, not so British as most of them. He'll do, don't you think?" "He'll have to." "You're sure he'll do it?" "He'll love it," Artis said positively, and disappeared again. It seemed that Terry was the actor who played Mary Rose's husband and lover, Simon, and I, who had never acted in so much as a school play, was to be pressed into the part. It was about half an hour before curtain time, so I had all 50 minutes to learn my lines before my entrance at the end of the first act. Paul, the director, warned me that if my name were used, the audience would be hostile, and since the character, in the version of the play they were presenting, was supposed to be an American, they would see errors where none existed. A moment later, while I was still in frantic rehearsal, I heard him saying, "The part of Simon Blake will be taken by Ned Jefferson." The act of stepping onto the stage for the first time was really the worst part of the entire affair. Fortunately, I had the advantage of playing a nervous young man come to ask for the hand of his sweetheart, so that my shaky laughter and stammer became acting. My second scene, with Mary Rose and Cameron on the Magic Island, ought by rights to have been much more difficult than the first. I had had only the intermission in which to study my lines, and the scene called for pessimistic apprehension rather than mere anxiety. But all the speeches were short, and Paul had been able by that time to get them lettered on large sheets of paper, which he and the stage manager held up in the wings. Several times I was forced to extemporize, but though I forgot the playwright's words, I never lost my sense of the trend of the play, which was always able to contrive something to which Artis and Cameron could adapt their replies. In comparison to the first and second acts, my brief appearance in the third was a holiday, yet I have seldom been so exhausted as I was tonight when the stage darkened for Artis's final confrontation with Creton, and Cameron and I, and the middle aged people who had played the Moorlands, were able to creep away. We had to remain in costume until we had taken our bows, and it was nearly midnight before Artis and I got something to eat at the same small, dirty bar outside, which Creton had tried to rob me. Over the steaming plate, she asked me if I'd enjoyed acting, and I had to nod. "I thought you would. Under all that solidity, you're a very dramatic person, I think." I admitted it was true and tried to explain why I feel that what I call the romance of life is the only thing worth seeking. She did not understand me, and so I passed it off as the result of having never been brought up in the Shah Mama, of which I found she had never heard. We went to her apartment. I was determined to take her by force if necessary, not because I would have enjoyed brutalizing her, but because I felt she would inevitably think my love far less than it was if I permitted her to put me off a second time. She showed me about her quarters, two small rooms in great disorder. Then, after we had lifted into the place the heavy bar that is the sigil of every American dwelling, put her arms about me. Her breath was fragrant with the arrack I had bought for her a few minutes before. I feel sure now that for the rest of my life that scent will recall this evening to me. When we parted, I began to unloose the laces that closed her blouse, and she at once pinched out the candle. I pleaded that she was thus depriving me of half the joy I might have had of her love, but she would not permit me to relight it, and our caresses and the embraces of our couplings were exchanged in perfect darkness. I was in ecstasy. To have seen her, I would have blinded myself, yet nothing could have increased my delight. When we separated for the last time, both spent utterly, she left the wash. I sought for matches. First in the drawer of the unsteady little table beside the bed, then among the disorder of my own clothes, which I had dropped to the floor and we had kicked about. I found some eventually, but could not find the candle. Artis, I think, had hidden it. I struck a match, but she had covered herself with a robe. I said, "Am I never to see you?" "You will see me tomorrow. You're going to take me boating, and we'll picnic by the water under the cherry trees. Tomorrow night the theater will be closed for Easter, and you can take me to a party, but now you are going home, and I am going to go to sleep." When I was dressed and standing in her doorway, I asked her if she loved me, but she stopped my mouth with a kiss. I have already written about the rest, returning to find 2 eggs instead of 3, and this book moved. I will not write of that again, but I have just, between this paragraph and the last, read over what I wrote earlier tonight, and it seems to me that one sentence should have more weight than I gave it. When I said that in my role as Simon, I never lost the trend of the play. What the fabled secret buried by the old Americans beneath their carved mountain may be, I do not know, but I believe that if it is some key to the world of human life, it must be some form of that. Every great man, I am sure, consciously or not, in those terms or others, has grasped that secret, save that in the play that is our life, we can grapple that trend and draw it to left or right if we have that will. So I am doing now. If the taking of the egg was not significant, yet I will make it so. Indeed, I already have, when I infused one egg with the drug. If the scheme in which artist is entangled, with Golam Gossam and Mr. Tallman, if be they, is not some affair of statecraft and dark treasures, yet I will make it so before the end. If our love is not a great love, destined to live forever in the hearts of the young and the mouths of the poets, it will be so before the end. Once again, I am here, and in all truth, I am beginning to wonder if I do not write this journal only to read it. No man was ever happier than I am now, so happy indeed that I was sorely tempted not to taste either of the two eggs that remain. What if the drug, in place of hallucination, self knowledge, and euphoria, brings permanent and despairing madness? Yet I've eaten it none the less, swallowing the whole sweet lump in a few bites. I would rather risk whatever may come than think myself a coward. With equanimity, I await the effects. The fact is that I am too happy for all the Faustian determination I penned last night. How odd that Faust would be the company's next production. Creton will be Mephistopheles, of course. Artist said as much, and it will be certain in any case. Artist herself will be Margaret, and but who will play the doctor? Yet now, when all the teeth gritting, table pounding determination is gone, I know that I will carry out the essentials of the plan more surely than ever, with the ease, in fact, of an accomplished violinist sawing out some simple tune while his mind roves elsewhere. I have been looking at the ruins of the Jeff, as they call it, and it has turned my mind again to the fate of the old Americans. How often they, who chose their leaders for superficial appearances of strength, wisdom, and resolution, must have elected them only because they were as fatigued as I was last night. I'd meant to buy a hamper of delicacies and call for Artis about 1, but she came for me at 11 with a little basket already packed. We walked north along the bank of the channel until we reached the ruins of the old tomb to which I have already referred, and the nearly circular artificial lake the Americans call the basin. It is rimmed with flowering trees, old and gnarled, but very beautiful in their robes of white blossom. For some little American coin, we were given command of a bright blue boat with a sail twice or three times the size of my handkerchief, which dare the halcyon waters of the lake. When we were well away from the people on shore, Artis asked me, rather suddenly, if I intended to spend all my time in America here in Washington. I told her that my original plan had been to stay here no more than a week, and then make my way up to the coast of Philadelphia and the other ancient cities before I returned home, but that now that I had met her, I would stay here forever if she wished it. Haven't you ever wanted to see the interior? The strip of beach we live on is kept half alive by the ocean and the trade that crosses it, but 100 miles inland lies the wreck of our entire civilization waiting to be plundered. Then why doesn't someone plunder it? I asked. They do. A year never passes without someone bringing some great prize out, but it is so large. I could see her looking beyond the lake and the fragrant trees. So large that whole cities are lost in it. There was an arch of gold at the entrance to St. Louis. No one knows what became of it. Denver, the mile high city, was nested in silver mines. No one can find them now. Many of the old maps must still be in existence. Artist nodded slowly, and I sensed that she wanted to say more than she had. For a few seconds, there was no sound but the water lapping against the side of the boat. I remember having seen some in the museum in Tehran, not only our maps, but some of your own from 100 years ago. The courses of the rivers have changed, she said, and many they have not, no one can be sure of it. Many buildings must still be standing as they are here in the Silent City. That was built of stone more solidly than anything else here in the country, but yes, many are still there. Then it would be possible to fly in, land somewhere, and pillage them. There are many dangers and so much rubble to look through that anyone might search for a lifetime and only scratch the surface. I saw that talking of all this only made her unhappy and tried to change the subject. Didn't you say that I could escort you to a party tonight? What will that be like? Nadan, I have to trust someone. You've never met my father, but he lives close to the hotel where you're staying and has a shop where he sells old books and maps. So I had visited the right house, almost, after all. When he was younger, he wanted to go into the interior. He made 3 or 4 trips, but never got further than the Appalachian foothills. Eventually, he married my mother and didn't feel any longer that he could take the risks. I understand. The things he had sought to guide him to the wealth of the past became his stock in trade. Even today, people who live farther inland bring him old papers. He buys them and resells them. Some of those people are only a step better than the ones who dig up the cemeteries for the wedding rings of the dead women. I recalled the rings I had bought in the shadow of the broken obelisk and shuddered, though I do not believe artists observed it. I said that some of them were hardly better than the grave robbers. The truth is that some are worse. There are people in the interior who are no longer people. Our bodies are poisoned. You know that, don't you? All of us Americans. They have adapted. That's what Father says. But they are no longer human. He made his peace with them long ago, and he trades with them still. You don't have to tell me this. Yes, I do. I must. Would you go into the interior if I went with you? The government will try to stop us if they learn of it and to confiscate anything we find. I assured her with every oath I could remember that with her beside me I could cross the continent on foot if need be. I told you about my father. I said that he sells the maps and records they bring him. What I did not tell you is that he reads them first. He has never given up, you see, in his heart. He has made a discovery? I asked. He's made many, hundreds. Bobby and I have used them. You remember those men in the restaurant? Bobby went to each of them with a map and some of the old letters. He's persuaded them to help finance an exposition into the interior and made each of them believe that will help him cheat the other. That keeps them from combining to cheat us, you see. And you want me to go with you. I was beside myself with joy. We weren't going to go at all. Bobby was going to take the money and go to Baghdad or Marrakesh and take me with him. But Nadan, here she leaned forward, I remember, and took my hands in hers. There really is a secret. There are many, but one better, more likely to be true, more likely to yield truly immense wealth than all the others. I know you would share fairly with me. We'll divide everything, and I'll go back to Tehran with you. I know that I have never been more happy in my life than I was then in that silly boat. We sat together in the stern, nearly sinking it, under the combined shade of the tiny sail and Artis's big straw hat, and kissed and stroked one another until we would have been pilloried a dozen times in Iran. At last, when I could bear no more unconsummated love, we ate the sandwiches Artis had brought and drank some warmish fruit flavored beverage and returned to shore. When I took her home a few minutes ago, I very strongly urged her to let me come upstairs with her. I was on fire for her, sick to impale her upon my own flesh and pour myself into her, as some mad god before the coming of the prophet might have poured his golden blood into the sea. She would not permit it. I think because she feared that her apartment could not be darkened enough to suit her modesty. I am determined that I will yet see her. I have bathed and shaved to be ready for the party, and as there is still time, I will insert here a description of the procession we passed on the way back from the lake. As you see, I have not yet completely abandoned the thought of a book of travels. A very old man, I suppose a priest, carried a cross on a long pole, using it as a staff, almost as a crutch. A much younger one, fat and sweating, walked backward before him, swinging a smoking censer. Two robed boys carrying large candles preceded them, and they were followed by more robed children singing, who fought with nudges and pinches when they felt that fat man was not watching them. Like everyone else, I have seen this kind of thing done much better in Rome, but I was more affected by what I saw here. When the old priest was born, the greatness of America must have been a thing of such recent memory that few could have realized it had passed forever, and the entire procession, from the flickering candles and clear sunshine to the dead leader lifted up, to his inattentive, bickering followers behind, seemed to me to incarnate the philosophy and the dilemma of these people. So I felt, at least until I saw that they watched it as uncomprehendingly as they might if they themselves were only travelers abroad, and I realized that its ritualized plea for life renewed was more foreign to them than to me. It is very late. 3, my watch says. I resolved again not to write in this book, to burn it, or tear it to pieces, or give it to some beggar, but now I'm writing once again because I cannot sleep. The room reeks of my vomit, though I have thrown open the shutters and let in the night. How could I have loved that? And yet, a few moments ago, when I was tried to sleep, visions of Ellen pursued me back to wakefulness. The party was a mask. An artist had obtained a costume for me, a fantastical gilded armor from the wardrobe of the theater. She wore the robes of an Egyptian princess and a domino. At midnight, we lifted our masks and kissed, and in my heart I swore that tonight the mask of darkness would be lifted too. When we left, I carried with me the bottle we had brought, still nearly half full. Before she pinched out the candle, I persuaded her to pour out a final drink for us to share when the first frenzy of our desire was past. She, it, did as I asked, and set it on the little table near the bed. A long time afterward, when we lay grasping side by side, I found my pistol with one groping hand and fired the beam into the wide bellied glass. Instantly, it filled with blue fire from the burning alcohol. Artis screamed and sprang up. I ask myself now how I could have loved, but then, how could I in 1 week have come so near to loving this corpse country? Its eagle is dead. Artis is the proper symbol of its rule. One hope, one very small hope remains. It is possible that what I saw tonight was only an illusion induced by the egg. I know now that the thing I killed before Artis's father's house was real. Between this paragraph and the last, I've eaten the last egg. If hallucinations now begin, I will know that what I saw by the light of the blazing arak was in truth a thing with which I have lain, and in one way or another will see to it that I never return to corrupt the clean wombs of the women of our enduring race. I might seek to claim the miniature of our heritage after all and allow the guards to kill me. But what if I were to succeed? I am not fit to touch them. Perhaps the best end for me would be to travel alone into this maggot riddled country. In that way, I will die at fit hands. Later, Creton is walking in the hall outside my door, and the tread of his twisted black shoes jars the building like an earthquake. I heard the word police as though it were thunder. My dead artist, very small and bright, has stepped out of the candle flame, and there is a hairy face coming through the window. The old woman closed the notebook. The younger woman, who had been reading over her shoulder, moved to the other side of the small table and seated herself on a cushion, her feet politely positioned so that the souls could not be seen. He is alive, then, she said. The older woman remained silent, her gray head bowed over the notebook, which she held in both hands. He is certainly imprisoned or ill, otherwise he would have been in touch with us. The younger woman paused, smothering the fabric of her chador with her right hand, while the left toyed with the gem simulator she wore on a thin chain. Is it possible that he's already tried, but his letters have miscarried? You think this is his writing? The older woman asked, opening the notebook at random. When the younger did not answer, she added, perhaps, perhaps. This is the afterword. Have you read The Last Camel Died at Noon? It's a mystery by Elizabeth Peters and stars a young, attractive Egyptologist named Amelia Peabody. Do you think there are no attractive young Egyptologists? I know one. I love those books. I love the Victorians who probed Africa when almost nothing was known about it. Sir Samuel Baker, the hero of boys' stories come to life, the well born Englishman who bought his wife at a slave auction, is a hero of mine and always will be. What about us? Who will probe our ruins? Who will come to Washington as we come to Athens? There are myriad ways to answer these questions. The story you have just read is only one of them. Woo! So that's a story of Seven American Nights. It's really like to say, it's a fascinating story because the it's about like the this text being written and erased and also edited and then read later and interpreted by these two people who return at the very end, the like his mother and his like betrothed back home in Tehran, and there's also the mention, of course, of the writing machine which they're working on. There's also the men that can duplicate handwriting and fabricate tales. So what, at what part and which parts are written by the AI and by the sort of nefarious FID, the like sort of CIA looking secret police force of the American ruins? Um, what have they edited, or which parts have they edited in this tale, in this text? And then you have to wonder, and then the real question is, what is the protagonist? What was he doing there in the first place? Because it's led on in the end, but it could also be that this implication that he was there for reasons other than just travel. He was there to steal these miniatures, these Persian miniatures that were housed in one of the museums and bring them back to Tehran. That was his goal. Perhaps that is actually just a fabrication on the part of the people writing the fake part of the journal, of the travel journal. There's a bunch of parallels, of course, to Christian symbolism and things. There's a Last Supper, there's a Judas kiss, and it literally takes place on leading up to Easter or Passover is the time period in which it takes place. So these are all classic Gene Wolfe gambits. But I think that its most interesting feature is
the premise itself of America uh, succumbing to what is effectively its people talk about this in racial terms, but Gene Wolfe is thinking about it more in terms of very scientific terms, that America would collapse in on itself from genetic experimentation upon itself, that being exposing the population to these sort of like industrial solvents, and that he makes the example of the bread that never goes bad, and like all of these sorts of things that we've developed, all of these medications, the sort of pharmaceutical aspect of America, which becomes famous hundreds of years hence for all of the psychedelic drugs and mind-altering drugs and its chemicals and its production of chemicals and drugs. That's what it's known for in the future. That would be the legacy of America, and it turning like Americans into like post-human mutants, werewolves, which is the point at the end that Ellen, the girl, is a werewolf as well. Like these people who live on in the interior, the ones who lived off of eating corpses during the time of the Great Famine, and human corpses being even more full of these chemicals than the foodstuffs that these chemicals were used to, explicitly referring to like factory farming practices with these sort of like genetically modified cows and chickens, etc. So I think that's all very interesting. That there's Gene Wolfe wrote this in the '70s, I believe he wrote this in 1978, and it seems like so fucking prescient for now. That like that the future of America would be uh, like Iranian businessmen touring like its ruins, and seeing like plays put on of like of like science fiction stories, basically. The theater, he says at a certain point in here, is the true like sacred thing in America. He says that like a loss of faith comes with the loss of enthusiasm. So throughout all of this, through the whole collapse, the Americans never lose their faith and their ardor for this spectacle of like drama. Gene Wolfe always presents the theater as fundamentally like suspicious. He sides with literature over the theater, because the theater requires participation on the behalf of the audience, like in a seeming passivity. Whereas like a reader, to read a book, you actually have to engage with it in a real sense. So he's like very sus on the theater as a form. This is something that you see in the Book of the New Sun also, when all the people who put on plays are kind of sinister. Yeah, that's my thoughts on this. There's been a bunch of essays people have written on this, trying to suss out the exact timeline events, which part is like which part is like hallucinated, if the drug ever existed. There's all of these questions that can never be answered in the book, which is or in the short story here, little novelette, however you want to put it. If anyone has anything to say, or any comments on it or whatever, you can hop on. But I need to drink some water because my throat hurts from reading that. Oh, we could also just leave it at that. I think the story's good enough to. Oh, cool. We got Matt, Ricky. What's up, Ricky? Take it away. Give my vocal cords a break.
Howdy, homie. How you doing?
I'm all right, man. Just read that. I've been meaning to read that one on a space for a long time because I think it's fucking crazy.
Yeah. Man, just the part when he was like, I argued with the girl for 30 minutes, and then she just said I couldn't do anything. Like that's just very that's the American spirit. And
Yeah,
to put some poetry in, like William Blake, like I was reading the America poem yesterday. He was like, it's a bard that grows tired of his own song.
yeah. Like the idea that there's still this kind of ritual bureaucracy that continues on like long after the American state crumbles, where like no matter what happens, you still go to you go to the police, and you can't even tell like who the police even are, and like you can't tell what's drama and what's not, whether or not this whole police station is just like put on as like a psyop, basically, is what it's implying. It's
Like I'll
wild.
have
Like Gene will, yeah.
like people who are like my dad I came, or even my manager, manifold of people, like they're like, yeah, dude, I fucking fought in that war for nothing, dude. Like I did it for myself, my personal betterment. But like like the part I really liked as well was that he was talking about like when he was like his friend was he was like, oh, it's just a prank, like or like let me frame it, let me take the spirit in the law to make it just a prank instead of having it be like you know
Yeah, it was just
like
it
because
was just
he knows that.
theater. It was just theater. Like, that's how you free people is you're like, oh no, we were just pretending.
Yeah, that's yeah.
Oh man,
Um,
the part that gets me the most, I
man, that
think
was
that the most striking line is when artist says, we all feel that we've been betrayed, but we don't know by who. We all feel we've been cheated, but maybe we feel cheated all the time." I think that's is how Americans feel. Everyone feels like they're being cheated and they're being like fucked with.
because they consent their soul to sinners. Like that's like we know it. Like like we
Well, it's because we all know we're being lied to. Like we're for like we celebrate being lied to. We've got the great theater, right? We've got the great
we
theater.
celebrate lying to people
Yeah,
to get days off. Like
yeah. We're so then, but then at the same time, we all are suspicious that we're being cheated because we are being cheated, but we never know exactly who's cheating us. And it's like, so this is like what is also like the cause of the decline of America is that it's like this ruthless, like simultaneous paranoia on the part of everyone. Like like, what's the more paranoid institution than like the intelligence agencies, right? Like the intelligence agencies are just as paranoid as like a raving like schizophrenic on the subway or something, right? Like it's like that from top to bottom. Everyone feels like they're getting cheated, and everyone's also simultaneously cheating each other, and putting on these performances.
a big question I had in relation to like yeah, just the since America and big thing with the flood, like like the flood, the whole purpose of the flood was to divide the Americas and the Asias, the origin of the East and the West. So this question of like the East, like with the Mandarin and stuff like that, wasn't it like 5,000 characters or something like that? And then like the Phoenician alphabet's like 26.
Yeah, yeah.
So like with the then he was that Mandarin guy was talking about like our Manchurian friend was talking about like how like it's more analytical, like the Eastern these symbols are more analytical. Do you think like and like no one's bothered to really like translate it since it's like older as well,
Yeah, I mean, we struggle a lot with we still haven't like we have like less. The thing is that like fundamentally we're just like not that interested in other parts of the world. Unfortunately, like we're really not, especially like older stuff from other parts of the world. There's like a wave of interest in it usually is actually just like funded by intelligence interest or like geopolitical interest. When all of a sudden, like for instance, in the '60s and '70s, you have all these people becoming interested in like Lao Tzu, et cetera, stuff like that. It's like and you've got like what the Chinese
inside
ballet, the Falun
what
Gong
was
ballet. You know what I'm talking about? Where it's like this was China before communism. Like we get interested in all these people's like quote unquote like traditional cultures, etc. When they
what was that
modernize.
Succession when that dude came in and that sage he was burning sage? That shit was funny.
Yeah,
It's like that is like that unironically like
it's like the
happens
Dalai
like
Lama,
like
right? It's like why is everyone interested in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, et cetera, et cetera? Like it's like okay, well we had like a geopolitical interest in Tibet, we were running shit there, you know what I mean? Like so they're like we're not like we don't have like an authentic civilizational interest in world history. We're like a pretty myopic civilization, in the sense that like we kind of only understand things in reference to ourselves, and everything's kind of like a bit too. Anyway, like oh yeah, we're all interested in the hippies are all reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead and saying like we got to free the Dalai Lama. This isn't a psyop though, right? Like it's just a totally legitimate academic concern. It's a it's a real love of the humanities, etc. Like it's all bullshit.
yeah. I just we gotta create I don't know I guess create more interest for people to translate shit because I mean like it's very I find it very important like that's revelation like it's like not done like many of these things are like
Well,
there's a huge just stagnation
I think it'll all get done. The thing is that I think it's going to be done by other powers, if that makes sense. Like I think that
and I'm gonna be working for those other powers is what I'm saying like I'm sick of like like yeah just there's I like yeah I talk to people here and like yeah it's just the same like I'd rather have someone be like oh okay well like let's actually like work together like the only people I can really have that relationship with is like people who are like basically anti-hegemonic and don't want this like already
yeah.
inherited like 40-hour a week schedule and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's like it's like the same thing where it's like in like I see this as a very like prophetic sort of story because it like already premises the fact that like America is like falling apart. Like you can see it, you know what I mean? We talk about like
like the descriptions of things like that in the 70s, it was already starting to become sort of apparent that all these things that America was making were like going to decay into nothing. Um, because we didn't have an interest in building like a real like civilization in the way that like it even describes the difference in the architecture, right? Where it's like, oh well, we have some things built out of stone. And he's like, well, back in Iran, like we our civilization may have fell like thousands of years ago. We're like under the under the shadow of Darius, et cetera, et cetera. But we when our the civilization that we did built things that have maintained themselves for much longer than these things. Like to see like the Washington Monument like half fallen over, and they've turned it into a marketplace to sell the silver rings of the silver that the wedding rings, etc. There's another little sub point there, which I think is meant to reference like the sort of werewolf aspect of all of this. That like the silver is partially prized more than it should be because it's actually used against like Americans who've turned into werewolves. I think that's like part of the subtext of the story.
Yeah, we're. I mean, just turn into monsters. I guess. I love when you're talking to Haas, and you're just like, what's the object of modernity?" And you're like, "I don't know, evil." It's like, yeah,
Yeah, it's a like well I always said that like furries sort of represented like the end like the absolute I like man becoming animal kind of telos of the American civilization. I used to always also point out to like you have all these like political conferences or whatever, and people are like oh dissidents, oh we're gonna have the DSA. There's more people who attend furry conventions than the DSA conventions. There's more people who attend the furry conventions than the Turning Point USA conventions. There's more people, you know what I mean? All the political stuff is actually completely secondary to the like literally like the furries as a cultural movement are much larger and more powerful than any of these like little political cults that people make, which is like I think says everything about America on its own.
that's yeah. There's just too much social capital tied up to it for like yeah. My best friend, he's just like, dude, like he's just like like he's he actually wanted to make a song about Sitting Bull. He had a because it's one of the OG's like Sitting Bull songs because he's half Native American. He was like half Native American, half African. So like yeah, he knows he knows what it is. He's like one of the songs I used to chant. They used to chant for like the Europeans to go home and stuff like that. And then once the Europeans started translating it, they were kind of just like, oh, never mind. Like stop singing the song. Like they were like vibing with it, but then they translated and they're like, actually, can you guys stop?
Oh
Like
man,
this whole
is that
this
like the
like
Ghost Dance songs?
yeah yeah I believe so. Yeah, that's what he was talking about, the ghost dance. Yeah.
Yeah, that stuff's interesting. That stuff is like influence is pretty interesting. I don't know. There's like there's like I kind of wish that Gene Wolfe had expanded this idea of like his vision of the post-apocalyptic America and like a travel journal written by like a
What was he
Muslim.
saying with like he had a dream that like he couldn't fire his pistol and turn red or something? Like that sounds like very
Well,
like
it's like yeah,
futuristic.
it's
Like
like it's supposed to be like a laser gun, like a laser pistol.
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
it just burns a hole through through things. That's the
Yeah.
idea. So it's like set like it's supposed to be like 200, 300 years into the future.
So like to I don't know, since I've like I guess I'm a polemic person. I guess like I just inherited this. I'm only I really come from. I never really told you where I came from. I guess I'll just drop it right now. My grandfather was a bank robber, and then my dad's became a banker. So the
Wow,
ironies of history.
that's not ironic at all. That's like you've got that's the Kennedy lineage. You start off as a gangster and you become the president.
And it's just so like like I was talking to my like grandpa because like on my mom's side, this is on the other side, like he came from just like he was an immigrant, like he had to like pick cotton and oranges to get to America and stuff like that. And like he's just talking about like how like the difference in heredity, like the my grandma, she's like actually came from like a better people who actually own lands and stuff like that. Not as much like influence but whatnot, like just a farm or something, but they it's like just yeah, it's just like he's telling the truth. Like as like my grandpa, like I have a deep appreciation for like these like like I guess like that background of just nothingness, like proletariat, like that's what it means, like the propertyless people. That's what Engels says inside the manifesto and stuff like that. Like he's just here like he's like, it's like he tells me everything. Like it's just a fountain, like as he said, like a prophetic fountain of just knowledge. Like he'll tell me just like it's like I have had friends come back from wars, and he'll like motion his arms as if he's like has like AK in his hand, and he'll be like, the generals just said the kids, the kids, the kids, and it's like we just like these people are damned. Like that's such damnation. You know how much like redemption that like that like it takes like I try to articulate it in like most poetic ways, like salvation. I'll just read scripture or something like that, but it's like that's really what I care about, like working for with like all these like people is like, even though like these are damned people, I will even work to
Yeah.
try to
Well, we're
form
all
some form
damned
of
people
salvation.
here, is the
Yeah,
thing.
exactly. Me too. I know. Like I'm not free of sin or whatnot, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Well, nice having you on, Ricky. Nice to hear that you come from a noble lineage of bank robbers turned banksters.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for reading the story, man. I
Yeah.
really, I did not waste my evening, as it said inside the story. So,
All right, man. Well,
appreciate you.
peace, man. All right. Anyone else got anything to say on it? I mean, I don't want to do this one for too long. It took me longer to read that than I thought it was going to take, but I had to read it all. I just had to, because it's one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite Gene Wolfe things, and that I've ever read. And I think I think about it all the time, like every time, like literally all the time, especially like these days when it's like become very clear that our role as citizens is to be test subjects for pharmaceutical companies and experimentation. And I think that inevitably one of these is going to be like completely catastrophic in a way that there is no returning from. And like we went through a whole year already of chemical fucking explosions off of like defunct rail, like destroyed railroad infrastructure, leading to these massive like chemical clouds. And Lord knows, we're poisoned here by so many things, and obviously this will have a cumulative effect generationally. So there's like, what is there any coming back from that? All right. All right. We got Fun Spot. What's up?
Oh, hey man. I just wanted to throw in a good word for Antonin Artaud. Um, with all the theater stuff and everything, like he he's the guy that Deleuze and Guattari got a body without organs. They got that from him, from his poetry and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and he's weird because he's kind of niche. People know about him, but he weirdly is like part of acting textbooks. Like he did get in there as like he's like Brecht or whatever, like people, but he didn't really put on plays. Like he never actually got to achieve his vision, but he knew he wanted to focus the whole thing on the audience participation and make the theater like a living event, make life. That was his whole philosophical thing, was just like, we're not living, people need to live more. Really radical guy. Like he wanted to break it all open. And
Oh yeah, I had to look it up because I didn't want to sound stupid, but I should have just said it because I knew that I knew this guy. He does a theater of cruelty stuff, right? Like that's very
yes,
informative for social media performances. I mean, look at like what's Sam Hyde doing right now? They've got like Fish Tank or something. That's
I
like pure
don't.
theater of cruelty.
Yeah, but it's not though. It's not like it is. The thing is, I think he was somebody who he was just describing, like he would, because he was a nuts. He was in asylums a few times, and he had a opiate addiction and stuff. But I think he was just aware. He was just feeling how everything was going to go and how everything was going to change. And so, like but I don't think he kind of got shut up. His line of thought, I think, is still clearly like, I don't know.
I think
I'm
that
still in him.
I think it's been
I'm
adapted.
not like above his
I think
work.
a lot of the times that these like avant-garde like theoreticians and stuff from like the 20th century they don't like I mean they there's like a kind of historical irony where they're ultimately fulfilled in these sort of the lowest form where it's like, okay, well, the real theater of
Yeah.
cruelty is pornographic live streaming and like sort of like hardcore pornography and things like that. And like, oh, like these charged, like they were positioning themselves against like this notion of like a restrictive Freudian notions that like, if we just need to liberate ourselves and be like open about what humanity actually is. But then it's like what they end up doing it's just completely degrading humanity and like identifying humanity with like the worst aspects of humanity, and then that becomes normative. So
Yeah,
like the theater of cruelty is normal now. Like yeah, everyone knows what that is. It's like you watch the
yeah,
kill
yeah.
stream.
They took, but that's like the most shallow layer of, like, he's been muzzled by getting the mention in all the textbooks. Like they don't really interact with his work. I mean, it's, and even if you want to say like he didn't make any of those pieces. He may have been had the theory for it, but he only put on a couple shows. What he mostly ended up wanting to do was very up your alley. He had a magic. He went to Ireland and he was trying to bring them a magic staff that was like, uh, it's, I mean, they have legends about it. It's like Jesus and St. Patrick's magic staff. And
Yeah,
he
this is
he
all just a weird. This is all just like occult, like LARPy shit from the 20th century. Like he probably met with like W.B. Yeats and like the Order of the Golden Dawn, and did like slit their wrists and chanted some shit. I don't know.
Well, sure, but you
But
can
Ty is
see
into the same
how
sort of stuff.
you can see, though, if you're faced with the choice of, who gets to run Europe, is it going to be the Germans? It's not a bad idea to go for the Christian Irish. You know what I mean? I mean, that's you're
Uh,
exploring all those same avenues.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if James Joyce would have agreed on that. The Irish, being Irish
They
myself,
both loved
are
shit.
very
Both
cruel
both
people.
Joyce and Artaud both loved shit. They love
The
to
the
talk
Irish
about it.
won their independence and immediately went to war with themselves and killed their heroic leader, and
Uh,
that's Irish people in
I
general.
don't know. I don't know about the Irish, man. I listened to one of their soccer podcasts, and they seem like confusing people at this point. They're like super Reddit, but they're better than that, you know? But they're like trying really hard to be Reddit people.
Well, yeah, I mean their country is just a little outpost of America at this point. There's a Yankee candle in Dublin, so I don't really like
Sure.
when I was in Ireland, I was like, this is just like could be New Hampshire.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't really see much of a distinction. There's more Irish people here than there are there, so it's all become one sort of thing. Ireland is now just like a crypto colony for banks, and Facebook is headquartered out of Ireland and things like that because they have a tax policy. The Celtic Tiger has very good corporate tax policies.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, you gotta at some point to stick around, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. There's like I don't know. But yeah, Artaud's worth reading. But I found like, I don't know. I read all of this edgy shit also when I was like a teenager, and I was like, ooh, edgy stuff, and reading, ooh, occult stuff, etc. But it's like what really kind of got me out of it or less interested in it was seeing how it was effectively like totally normal at this point, that there was no real transgression involved in it at all, that this whole culture of transgression was our normal culture. And I think that's actually seen in
Sure.
this Gene Wolfe story.
I don't think he was trying to transgress. I don't know. I'm not. I have been.
Uh,
I have been a little bit of a. I mean, I read Maldoror last year too, but I've never really been into. I don't know. I've kept track on the edgy stuff, but I haven't. I didn't even listen to emo stuff, but I don't know. I don't think he was. I think he was. He should have been like an academic. Like he does kind of. He would fit in sort of this academic philosophy thing where he's kind of just trying to make some small points and like reorient our thinking about humans. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I think
yeah, well,
I
it's sort of the same
that's
way
why I
that
say
like
like it's
Foucault
not
does,
transgressing.
where it
Like,
describes itself as this like liberatory project of being like, hey, let's like look at the dark heart of humanity. But in secret, really deeply, it's like this is like what humanity really is, and like, as opposed to being like a kind of like, oh, let's look at this and deal with it. It's kind of like, let's look at this and celebrate it. Is kind of like where this type
that's
of
that's why
goes.
he's so important, because he is very definitely not doing that. Where I would agree. Like, I mean, I don't know. Maybe check out his stuff on the Surrealists, because he had a lot of. He fell out with them. I know he pissed them off because he said Marxism is shit,
Yeah,
and
I was about to
they
say he
couldn't
probably
take that.
fell out with the surrealists because the surrealists were all communists.
Well, were they really? Do we really think Breton was like some great I don't know.
I think Breton was allied with the Soviet project, definitely. I mean, like the avant-garde, like
Sure.
they saw in the Soviet project an attempt to create like a total work of art, like a civilizational art.
Right, right. Well, yes. I mean, I can see he's a problem. The thing with him saying Marxism is shit, to me, reading his stuff, I take that immediately as just it's a metaphor. Like, it is literally shit.
I think
Marxism
you're
is
very
something.
charitable.
Marxism, no,
You're
no.
more
It's
charitable than I would
about
be.
the mechanisms of these things. What is shit? Shit is something that comes out of us. It's as simple as that. It's what it's our product. It's our waste product. You know what I mean? So in this imperialist line of thinking, this I don't know. We came up with Marxism. Like Marxism came from inside the house. You know what I mean? It is shit. That's why it's not something we should be all puristically wrapped up on. Like it is just simple materialist stuff. It's not. I don't know. I know that does sound kind of charitable, but I think his reputation has gotten. Um, there's a few layers that he himself was not necessarily putting there.
I think it's I think that he comes from the same school of a lot of people, like as I was saying, like Bataille and others who are seeking a reenchantment of the world by kind of finding joy in the cruelty of modernity. And like when he was saying that Marxism is shit, you can read it that way as metaphorically, but I think it's more that this opposition to anything that had a sort of ostensible ethical end that was like material as opposed to re-enchanting the world to create like a myth by which you could enliven the world or something like that.
Sure, except that he doesn't want to re-enchant. He wants the radical embrace of nothing.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean.
I mean, what have you been writing about nothing lately? You've been on a roll. You've been writing some great stuff.
Yeah, but we mean very different things by that.
I don't know, man. I'm I'm a good reader. I'm a little different. But I think you guys are on the same thing there.
I
You'll
think
check them
so.
out. You'll check them out.
The
I'm just
the
putting in a word. I don't know. It is tough, but I don't know. He goes along with me too with the French they have the Gaston Bachelard and Henri Bergson. Like their philosophy of science is more poetic and their poetry is more scientific. You know, they have what we should have reasonably expected English or American culture to have, which we if we did, it doesn't exist anymore.
I think that we have that in like you get that in like the science fiction. Like that's
Yeah.
really like I don't know.
Oh yeah,
I don't
definitely.
know. I think it's definitely worth reading all of these things, but I would read them more critically, I think.
I'm reading
In
Robert Silverberg too, and I would agree. He's got those sci-fi guys are on the same thing. I mean, it's this whole that I don't know. It's just the French were able to, for whatever reason, just literally say like emotions are real, the imagination is real, intuition is real, and they're rational, or they have a rationality. They can be in tune with their rationality. Like that is such basic shit.
Yeah, but that can also mean, like that it can also lead to a type of adoration for like fields like evolutionary psychology, like and the sort of your intuition here that Giga Chad is right about everything is correct because like that's like stuff is all
Sure.
wielded sort of cybernetically now. Like
But if
you
you
can be
used your
more
intuition
forgiving from the
for if you use
context.
your intuition for more than like 10 minutes, you realize that it's not the Giga Chad in your brain that's in charge. Like I don't know. I agree. I agree. I there
I'm just
are
saying. I
it's
think
all.
that
I mean, I see most of that stuff as like it's Christian stuff. I'm gonna struggle talking to you because I mostly use the word Christian in a derogatory way, but
yeah,
that's just
this is
because
exactly what I mean.
I was no, I was homeschooled. I know that I wasn't raised in actual Christianity. I am a Christian. I have been a Christian for a long time, but the Christianity I was raised in was not Christianity.
Yeah.
So it's an unfortunate thing. But I would just say the church or whatever, the people that call themselves Christians, um, it's just people responding to that. Like that shit is bad, and it's not founded on anything. And so when people have to do their backlash to it. Like, I see those as one and the same thing, and Artaud is not stuck in that. He's not stuck in
I
resentment.
think he's a bit of like an anarchist. Like a lot of this stuff is like, yeah, so it's like in hardcore punk shows, right? Like you'd have like people like G.G. Allen like slitting their wrists and people spitting on each other and beating the shit out of each other and stuff. And it's like, yeah, this is all like the
Sure.
liberation of the unconscious, etc. And like this is all like true. This is like a real portrait of mankind or whatever, you know. I
I'd
get
have
it,
a few
but
anarchists around if they agreed to be the shamans and not interfere with the other societal tasks.
I just think I wanted to read this one in the record in the same way as I wanted to read the anarchist banker into the record, because I think that they both deal with this kind of this kind of this it's like a way of seeing things that is not so standard, I suppose, but I wish more people would adopt. So for instance, in the anarchist bankers, to see that anarchists, this whole talk of like the liberation of human potential in that sense, it can actually always also be a cover for a sort of sadistic view of things, a sort of Nietzsche, a sort of left Nietzscheanism, etc. And in the same way that this story that I just read for all of you by Gene Wolfe is really about how America is not going to collapse from some sort of foreign malfeasance, etc., which is like in the story, America maintains, or at least the federal police maintain, a complete paranoia about visitors from foreign countries and about intrigues and things like this. But the collapse of America is actually from inside of itself, from it poisoning itself with its own spectacular delusions and drugs and this type of experimentation. This sort of Faust is referenced many times in there, and this is what it shows. Like the end of the Faustian America is everyone becoming lab rats for Dr. Fauci. So,
But
but
so
thanks for coming on.
you don't think that is America's thing though? Like, we are the spectacle. We are the new world. We are where everyone else is going to
Yeah,
move.
but I think
Like
the curtains are
we
going to
aren't
close,
the.
and something else will happen. I think the curtains are closing.
I think so. I agree. I'm pretty pessimistic about all that,
But the show must go on,
it's
as they
just
say.
it's just the fact of. I mean, this is a bigger thing, but like you were saying, like the CIA, they thought like a schizophrenic person. They were interested in all these things. Of course, that was them being rational observers of the world. If you're a rational observer of the world, you have to acknowledge that, oh yeah, there's odd things happen. You know, humans seem to be capable of hallucinations of some kind, you know, and you can take whatever viewpoint you want on that, but it's like it's a studyable phenomenon.
Yeah,
So of
but
course
then you have to wonder,
that's the
like, what do
great
you do with that study, right? Like, what is
well
it?
that's the great that's
What
the
is it
great
used for?
tragedy of the 20th century. Whenever we leveled up, it was all in the hands of business. You know, there were amazing. I don't know. I mean, it's just that if it had been in the hands of the artists and people like Artaud, the art critics and the theoreticians, we can say pretty easily that it would at least be built on more solid foundation than whatever the CIA was
Well,
working
I
on.
think that if you look at like objectively, right? Well, it's like you could look at it when there was another civilization that put it in the hands of shepherds and people working in the fields, and they had their struggles, and perhaps they aren't making world spectacles that are attracting the attention of everyone yet. But what has it led their society to? For instance, like compare China to America right now and the trajectories over the last 50 years, and you go like maybe our emphasis on all of these things is actually bad, or maybe what we just need to do is we
I
need to
agree.
support
We need
the
a
Hollywood writers strike, and we say, you know what, we just need them to make more money because they're the real value producing class. They are our spiritual, our shamans, and they let
no.
us escape into a world of true humanity or whatever.
It should all be liberated. I mean, the real theorists, Artaud or John Cage or I don't know, Thelonious Monk or something, the real great masters, they even Bach, they give everyone else the tools immediately, so you don't end up with any authority figures left. If everybody like Joyce, Joyce, he's like not a he's just gave all of that to us. Even like That's
Sure.
what I'm saying. If you base it on the people that are tapping into the actual stuff, it's all universal. Everybody is just as capable of being an artist or whatever as anybody else. So these
Yeah.
things they're universal, and they're funneled away as not universal. So of course, there's going to be resentment. There's going to be bad shamans and blah blah blah. But it's still the frontier there is not going to close. I would agree. I think it would probably be nice if we just took a 10, 15-year timeout and everybody was just quiet and like just did everything slowly and quietly.
If it was up to me, I would shut down all of the entertainment industry for at least 10 years.
Absolutely. We have all the good stuff. We could go back and catalog if we really had the
Yeah,
juice.
there's not really anything good enough being made to justify our massive expense on it. We should just,
No.
take it back to the drawing board, or let people do their own production on a smaller scale. I tend to think that people do better stuff, make better things than these massive conglomerates anyway.
Yeah.
So,
You just got to watch out for the
like, look at
cops
Gene Wolfe. Gene
and
Wolfe's
the
only writing this
lawsuits.
sort of shit. Gene Wolfe wrote this shit, and he had like no readership, really, none at all. He was not that popular or big of a figure. I mean, he was like a niche figure within a niche literary scene
Oh,
of like
right.
science fiction.
I have him in
And
my head as Tom Wolfe this whole time.
the only reason he could write like that is because he, being a very practical, pragmatic engineering type of guy, had invented the means of producing Pringles. So the Pringles man, in his retired leisure, after giving us, all of us, not just ideas, but Pringles that you can eat and are everywhere. The shape of the
Pringles
Pringles
in a
ship,
can,
a
man.
miracle to fit into that can. Truly an engineering marvel.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks for coming on. I think I'm going to sign off on this one, guys. Have a good one, everyone.
See ya.